Good evening. And in your scroll-cluttered study in Augustan Rome, around 15 BCE, where cedar oil rises from wooden cases and lamplight pools over papyrus and cooling posca, you begin asking whether Romulus and Remus were real, while half the city calmly counts its years from 753 BCE as if the answer has always sat neatly on a shelf. Dylan in Sydney and Megan in Manchester commented on the last video and stayed until the end, and you are very glad they are here again. Tell me where you are and what time it is for you, just like Dylan and Megan did, and if you like and subscribe, you can settle in and fall asleep easily with every episode. Have you ever wondered when a story stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like family history? Now the lamp draws you back to your desk. The air tastes faintly sour from cooling posca, and your fingers carry cedar dust and warm wax while the stylus whispers across the tablet. You are already halfway through copying a list of dates for your imperial patron when the old question returns, soft and stubborn, beside the lamp. The commission sounds simple when it first arrives. You are to prepare a clear account of Rome's beginning. That sounds tidy on a wax tablet. It sounds less tidy among 40 rolls, 3 bad copies, and 1 missing Etruscan chronicle. Your patron wants something truthful. Your patron also wants something flattering. In Augustan Rome, those two wishes often share a couch. They do not always sleep especially well. You sit on a low stool with a cushion gone thin at the middle. The wood beneath it reminds you that truth has edges. Your lamp burns with a steady little flame. The gold light makes every roll look more certain than it is. This is one of history's oldest tricks. Lamplight can make even a guess look official. Around you, cedar oil lingers in the wooden scroll cases. The smell is dry, clean, and faintly sweet. It mixes with wax, old glue, and papyrus dust. The whole room smells like careful work. A clay cup of posca rests near your elbow. It has gone almost cool, though not quite. You take a sip anyway. Scholars in Rome are not famous for waiting until the perfect temperature. Outside, the city keeps breathing beyond your shutter. Sandaled feet pass in the lane below. Somewhere a cart complains at its axle. Somewhere else a dog gives one thoughtful bark and decides that is enough. Inside, the scratch of your stylus seems louder than it should. It sounds like a tiny broom sweeping doubt into neat lines. Your notes already carry the usual names: Mars, Rhea Silvia, the twins, the river, the wolf. They also carry the usual problem. Stories can be old without being exact. You are not trying to be rude to the ancestors. You are trying to ask what sort of truth they handed down. That is a gentler question than people think. It does not march in wearing boots. If a figure stands at the start of a people, what does it mean for that figure to exist? Must a founder leave bones, or is a name enough? You turn that question over like a pebble in your fingers. It stays smooth on one side and stubborn on the other. A king may exist in song before he exists in a list. A city may remember a person by remembering what it needs. Rome, for example, likes a beginning with strong posture. Rome likes a beginning that already looks Roman. That is one reason this work matters now. Augustus is very good at beginnings. He likes to polish them until they shine. You might call it Rome's first great rebranding campaign, though in marble. There are monuments for it. There are poems for it. There are also scholars like you, seated among scrolls, trying to make the polished parts fit the older wood. Virgil has already been busy with his grand commission. He has made a wandering refugee feel like the grandfather of destiny itself. It is handsome work. It is also a reminder that founding stories are often dressed for public view. Your task is a little different. You do not get to write only what sounds noble in torchlight. You must sort through what priests repeat, what poets improve, and what the ground itself quietly keeps. The ground, to its credit, is less chatty than poets. It is also harder to interview. You glance toward the shelf where the key Etruscan chronicle should be waiting. The shelf glances back with perfect innocence. That wandering scroll has now been definitively shelved in 4 places. It is currently in none of them. Fulvia the archivist said, with a heavy sigh, that it was here this morning, I promise you. You believed her then, and you believe her now. You also suspect the scroll enjoys travel. Some texts seem to want a social life. Gaius the Greek sits at the side table with his own wax tablet. He makes a small sound through his nose when you cite Livy. It is not quite a sigh. It is not quite a prayer. It is the sound of a man who believes every Roman source should report to 2 Greek authors before breakfast. He mutters that Homer covered all of this already. You let him mutter. A study is healthier with a familiar irritation in one corner. Besides, he is useful. He remembers quotations with the same joy other men reserve for figs. He has already copied 3 versions of the founding date. None of them agree as politely as you would like. That date matters more than an outsider might think. Romans do not treat 753 BCE as a loose family guess. They use it to count time itself. They speak of years from the founding of the city. A person may say how many years have passed since Rome began, and the room will nod. That is a remarkable confidence to build upon an old tale. Not every scholar lands on the exact same day. Ancient minds, like modern ones, enjoy a date and then gently argue around it. Still, the habit is real. Rome likes to pin its birthday to the calendar. There is comfort in that. A city, like a household, enjoys knowing when to blow out the symbolic candles. You dip the stylus again and write the date once more. The wax receives it without complaint. 753 before the common counting of our future descendants. Here, in your own moment, it is simply the old fixed point. That number feels solid because everyone repeats it. Repetition can feel like stone. Sometimes repetition really does preserve stone. Sometimes it preserves only the shape of a wish. You do not despise wishes. Cities need them the way roofs need beams. But tonight you are looking for the join between beam and paint. You want the wood beneath the red color. So you begin as Rome always begins, with a woman under a vow. Rhea Silvia stands at the opening of the tale. She is usually described as a Vestal. That gives the story both dignity and trouble at once. Then Mars enters the picture. The god of war is not famous for modest claims of fatherhood. For Rome, though, the pairing is almost too perfect. A sacred mother and a martial father produce the city's first sons. It is excellent symbolism. It also makes your eyebrows lift a little over the wax. You do not dismiss it. You simply note how well it suits the people telling it. From that union come the twins. Romulus and Remus arrive together, which stories often enjoy. Twins are useful in myth. They bring likeness, rivalry, doubled promise, and a simple pleasure of symmetry. They also invite the oldest human game, which brother will stand for order, and which for the road not taken. Soon the tale carries them to the Tiber. The river is both danger and helper, which rivers often are. The infants are set upon the water in a basket. The image is so neat that it almost arranges itself in your mind. A small craft, a slow current, reeds bending at the edge. Even now, with your study warm around you, you can feel the cool breath of river mud in that picture. Founding stories like a river, because water makes a clean stage. The Tiber in Roman memory behaves with excellent dramatic timing. It does not sweep the twins away beyond recovery. Instead, it pauses, or swells, or gently leaves them where they can be found. Nature in a founding legend is always strangely cooperative. Then comes the part everyone waits for. The she-wolf appears. You can almost hear the city's smile at that point. Rome loves the wolf. Children know the image. Old men quote it. Artists keep drawing it with increasing confidence. A wolf nurses the twins beneath a tree, and Rome receives the most famous animal caretaker in Western memory. It is a striking picture, and perhaps a little too striking. You pause there because this is where the old pontiff usually turns pink. He does not enjoy your thoughtful face during the wolf section. Once, when you said the she-wolf might be metaphorical, he stared at you as if you had sneezed in a shrine. Another time you mentioned post holes and he left in silent outrage. You still do not know which offended him more. Priests, like scholars, keep a few mysteries for themselves. The wolf question is not silly, though. In Latin, a she-wolf can be a wolf. It can also point in certain earthy corners of speech toward a woman of a different sort. Rome's language sometimes winks when it should probably sit still. So perhaps the tale remembers an animal. Perhaps it remembers a human nurse wrapped in memorable slang. Perhaps, as often happens, later ears preferred fur. A wolf is cleaner on a coin than gossip. You make a note without pressing too hard. A careful scholar survives by writing lightly around cherished images. After the wolf comes rescue by ordinary people. That part to you is almost more believable than the miracle. A shepherd finds the children in many versions. A household raises them with goat's milk, coarse cloth, and practical noise. That is how most humans enter history anyway, not with thunder, but with soup. You picture the boys growing on the hillside. You picture rough tunics, scratched knees, and bread gone a little hard at the edge. You picture smoke from the cooking fire. You picture lentils simmering until they finally forgive the water. This is where myth and life touch hands. Grand founders still need sandals. No city is built by symbols alone. Even legend has to stop and eat. You write down the usual steps of the tale. Divine birth, river exposure, wild nursing, rustic upbringing, eventual return to origin. The pattern looks familiar. That is because it is. Stories across the old world enjoy abandoned noble children who return with larger purpose. The pattern is older than Rome and younger than hope. Gaius notices your pause and gives another little tut. He says a Greek audience would want parallels listed properly. You tell him that a Roman audience would want fewer smirks in the margin. He nods as if indulging a charming provincial habit. Still, his point remains. Similar stories exist elsewhere. That does not prove Rome invented its own from thin air. It does suggest Rome shaped its story using well-loved building blocks. Humans do this constantly. We furnish the past with forms our minds already understand. A river means fate. Twins mean choice. A wolf means wilderness, daring, and excellent sculptural opportunities. Mars means that Roman toughness arrives early. Rhea Silvia means sacred dignity arrives with it. The whole package is tidy. Real beginnings are usually less tidy. Real beginnings leave broken pots. Real beginnings leave ditches, ash, and old fence lines. That is why your work drifts, sooner or later, from poets to soil. The wax tablet leads you toward the hill itself. The Palatine rises not far away, familiar and loaded with memory. To modern pride, it can seem inevitable. To early Italy, though, it may have been more like a very exclusive gated community. It was small, watchful, and deeply suspicious of the next hill over. That image helps you keep your scale honest. Founding Rome does not begin as founding an empire. It begins as a few people deciding where to sleep, where to store grain, and which slope catches the best sun. History often starts with practical real estate. Archaeology, when available, says something calm and important here. There are traces of settlement on the Palatine in the 8th century BCE. That matters because the traditional founding date sits in that same neighborhood of time. The ground at least does not laugh the story out of the room. There are hut remains. There are cuttings, holes for timber, and signs of simple early homes. You mention post holes to yourself in a whisper, just to enjoy the old pontiff's imaginary outrage. The lamp does not report you. These are not grand palaces. They are not marble stages waiting for Augustus. They are humbler than that, which is one reason they feel trustworthy. A real beginning ought to be a little uneven. You imagine one of those huts in evening light. The roof smells of straw and smoke. The floor is hard under bare feet. A bowl sits by the wall, with grain dust caught in its rim. A child sleeps under rough wool. Someone checks the pot and adds a little more water. That world is not the polished Rome of your patron, yet it is a world from which Rome can plausibly grow. This is the first steady piece of ground under your sandals. Not proof of twins, but proof of people. That difference matters. It keeps you from asking the earth to do a poet's work. A trench will not produce Mars. A patch of ancient floor will not hand you a wolf. The ground can only say that humans lived here, built here, buried here, and stayed long enough to matter. It speaks plainly, which you appreciate. So did Romulus and Remus exist? You return to that question and find it has quietly changed shape. If you ask whether two named infants with divine fatherhood and wolf milk can be verified, the answer grows thin. If you ask whether Rome's early memory preserves real leaders from a real 8th century settlement, the answer grows warmer. There may have been a founder. There may have been several, remembered as one. There may have been brothers. There may have been rival groups later folded into a family tale. The name Romulus itself makes scholars twitch a little. It looks suspiciously close to Roma. That does not settle anything by itself. Names often gather around places, and places gather around names. Still, you cannot help noticing the neatness. It's like meeting a baker named Loafman and trying to keep a straight face. Remus is harder to place with equal ease. He feels both necessary and slightly shadowed. That can happen in paired myths. One twin carries the city, and the other carries the path not taken. You write carefully that legendary founders often personify communities. You then scrape the sentence back because it sounds pompous. You rewrite it in plainer words. Sometimes a person in a story stands for a whole group. That will do better. Wax tablets reward humility. The hour grows later without fuss. The lamp oil sinks a little in its dish. You flex your fingers and feel the small ache of steady work. It is a comforting ache. Fulvia passes the doorway at a half jog with 3 rolls in her arms. Without stopping, she says it was here this morning. I promise you. You thank her, though neither of you names the wandering scroll directly. It has become a household spirit with bad habits. Gaius reads out a Greek parallel that involves exposed children and noble birth. He sounds pleased with himself in 3 languages. You admit the likeness. You also remind him that likeness is not sameness. Rome's tale is Roman in its arrangement. It puts the city's favorite furniture in all the right places. It centers the Tiber. It crowns the Palatine. It gives Rome a father fit for military pride and a childhood fit for hard weather. It also gives Rome an origin old enough to command respect, yet human enough to live in memory. That combination is politically delicious. Augustus understands that better than most. A stable future likes a well-curated past. If the city can be shown as ancient, chosen, and somehow always pointed toward greatness, the present gains a glow from borrowed fire. Even scholars can feel the warmth of that. Yet you are not merely trimming a laurel wreath for power. You are also doing something tenderer. You are asking what Romans loved enough to preserve. That is another kind of evidence. People do not keep every story. They keep the ones that explain the shape of their own face. Rome keeps this story because it answers several needs at once. It explains courage, hardship, bloodline, place, and luck. It also explains why Romans can admire both roughness and ritual. Their founders, after all, have 1 foot in the wild and 1 near the altar. You rest the stylus and listen to the room. Wax cools quickly when left alone. In that quiet, the question becomes less sharp and more human. You stop asking only whether the twins were factual. You begin asking what kind of memory can survive when names harden into legend. That is a softer inquiry, and sometimes a wiser one. A real shepherd family may stand behind the tale. A real local dispute may sit behind the brothers. A real settlement certainly stands beneath the later city. The hill has already answered that much. And yet the wolf remains. The river remains. Mars remains, smiling from the polished side of the tradition. You do not need to choose between total belief and a cheerful sneer. Ancient stories deserve better manners than that. You can let the myth be beautiful. You can also ask what pieces are likely stitched from older cloth. That is the sort of work you are trusted to do. Not to break the statue, but to look at the joins. Outside, Rome settles deeper into night. The city is never silent, but it grows gentler. The sounds beyond the shutter become fewer and softer. Somewhere, someone sets down a jar with great care. You smooth a thumb over the edge of the tablet. A little ridge of wax folds under the nail. On the papyrus beside it, you have written 2 columns. One is for the tale as told. The other is for what can be supported by date, place, and the habits of human communities. The columns are not enemies. They lean toward each other like neighbors over a wall. Sometimes they even share fruit. In the tale as told, the twins are clear and bright. In the world of evidence, the outlines blur. But blurred outlines are still outlines. An 8th century settlement on the Palatine is not nothing. A remembered founder attached to that horizon is not nothing either. Even a polished myth can preserve an old backbone. You think of 753 BCE again. It may not be a perfect birthday. It may be a learned best guess, sharpened by later scholars and repeated until it felt ceremonial. Yet it points toward the right century with surprising grace. That, too, is worth respecting. Precision can fail while memory still succeeds. Gaius has stopped muttering and started yawning. This, more than any argument, improves the atmosphere. He rubs his eyes and says perhaps Livy is tolerable when handled carefully. You accept this as the nearest thing to praise he can manage. You reach for the pasca and finish the last sour mouthful. It is no colder than truth, and a little easier to swallow. On the fresh patch of wax, you press the next line. You write that the story of Romulus and Remus is neither empty air nor simple record. It is a layered memory. It is history wearing ceremonial dress. Beneath the god and the wolf, there seems to be a real hill, a real community, and a real beginning in the 8th century BCE. Whether two exact brothers stood there remains far less certain. That sentence feels balanced enough to keep. It may even please your patron, if read after supper and before criticism. You set the stylus down for a moment and look at the rolls again. The cedar smell has deepened as the room cools. Somewhere in these cases are older voices, later guesses, and a few bare facts, wearing too much embroidery. You are learning to separate stitch from cloth. For tonight, that is enough. You do not need to drag every answer into the light at once. It is enough to know that Rome's founding story stands partly on stone and partly on symbol. That mix is very often how ancient memory works. You turn the tablet slightly so the lamplight catches the new lines. The wax shines like dark honey. Beside your hand, the date waits patiently. Beside the date, the twins still drift on their careful river. And while Gaius finally nods over his notes, and the missing Etruscan scroll remains cheerfully elsewhere, you keep writing, letting the city's oldest question rest for a while between the solid post holes of the hill and the soft fur of the wolf. You smooth a fresh patch of wax with the flat end of your stylus. The date staring back at you looks almost rude in its certainty. April 21st, 753 years before this very age. Lamplight pools over stacked papyrus rolls and a clay cup of cooling pasca. Cedar oil drifts from the wooden scroll cases in a clean, dry breath. Outside, Rome settles into evening, while you try to pin down her first morning. The date comes to you through Varro, who loves a neat sum almost as much as any banker. You can feel his arithmetic marching across the years in tidy sandals. He counts magistrates, reigns, Olympiads, and every scrap of remembered sequence he can gather. You imagine him leaning over lists, with the same strained eyes you now rub gently. One consul follows another, and one generation follows another, like beads sliding on a string, and also the sort of work that makes numbers look calmer than people ever are. Gaius the Greek hears you mutter Varro's name and gives his usual small noise of pain. It is a careful little tut, shaped by long practice and deeper disappointment. He says no Roman source should stand upright without 2 Greek crutches beside it. He scratches a note on his wax tablet with the air of a man correcting a lazy child. Then he mutters that Homer covered all of this already, which is not true here either. Gaius can connect any subject to Homer in fewer breaths than most men need for soup. You set the stylus down and look again at the date's polished confidence. It offers a birthday for a city as if cities arrive wrapped and labeled. It feels like finding a tag tied to a mountain goat. Yet the day itself is not chosen at random from the sky. April 21st already carries the old shepherd feast of Perilia. Fires are lit then, stables are cleaned, and smoke drifts over sheep and sleeping dogs. It is a country day at heart, not a marble day. You can smell it even through the scroll dust, warm wool and trampled straw. A city claiming that feast for its own first breath is already telling you something. The old pontiff arrives before the thought fully settles in your mind. He always appears without warning, like a moral lesson with sandals. His cheeks are pink from the climb and from the effort of disapproving before he hears anything new. He lowers himself onto a stool with a long priestly sigh. Then he asks, very softly, whether you are keeping the wolf in the account. You say you are keeping everything, which is true in the way a basket keeps both figs and dust. He approves of the answer until you add that later Romans may have worked backward toward their beloved date. At once his neck grows blotchy and his nostrils sharpen. Arithmetic makes him uneasy when it approaches sacred ground. Still, even he likes a fixed point in the fog. A city with a birthday can have cakes of the mind. A city with only layers and guesses feels harder to salute in a ceremony. You run your thumb along the edge of a papyrus roll and think about the backwards count. Every step depends on records copied by tired hands and remembered by busy men. Every missing year gets patched with confidence, which is the cheapest building material in Italy. A king's reign may stretch or shrink as stories pass from mouth to tablet. A list may skip a troubled season or smooth an awkward overlap. One careful scholar then inherits those bends and draws a ruler straight across them. This is not fraud, which would be far too lively for your evening. It is the gentler old habit of making the past stand still. The past rarely does that, unless someone sits on it. You sip the sour posca and let the taste pull you back to simple things. Dates are useful because the hand likes to point somewhere exact. Minds rest easier when they can circle one square on the calendar. A single day also flatters Roman pride in a brisk, efficient way. It suggests intention, ceremony, and a founder who arrives right on schedule. Augustus would call that a fine rebranding campaign, though he would use nobler words and more marble. You glance toward your commission, sealed and heavy on the shelf. Your patron wants something truthful and flattering, which is an old Roman wish. It is like asking for plain bread that also tastes of honey. So you turn from the date itself to the sort of life that makes dates possible. On the table lies a sketch of rough huts and little fence lines. The drawing looks less like a glorious beginning and more like neighbors borrowing each other's goats. Real cities usually begin with repeated chores and stubborn feet. Someone clears brush from a slope and pats mud around wattled walls. Someone else stores grain in a pit and hopes the roof keeps out winter rain. A path forms because children cut across it every day with baskets. Another path forms because cattle do not care about elegant planning. By the time anyone notices, the ground already has opinions. One family builds near a spring because the water runs sweet and cold. Another builds uphill because the air feels cleaner after summer storms. A third prefers a ridge where pigs are less likely to root through the beams. No one stands on a rock and says, "Today we invent urban life." They say this patch drains well after rain. They say the smoke goes that way if we place the hearth there. Season follows season, and practical choices accumulate like flour dust in a mill. Roofs need mending, walls need daubing, and grain must stay dry. That is how history so often enters, with a basket under each arm. You think of post holes, those humble dark marks where wood once stood and rotted away. They are the sort of clue only a patient person could love. The old pontiff once left in silent outrage when you used that very word. He had asked about sacred beginnings and noble omens. You had answered with post holes and floor levels and burnt grain. He departed so quietly that the lamp sounded loud for several minutes. Yet post holes tell the soft truth of staying put. A stake driven once is a moment. A stake driven again in nearly the same place is a habit. Then a habit becomes an address, though no one calls it that. Children are born beside the same hearth where their mothers once slept. Grandparents know where the winter wind leaks under the wall, and they stuff it with reeds. Storage jars gather in corners, blackened pots hang by cords, and woven mats wear thin. Ash heaps rise behind houses in modest gray mounds. Broken cups pile up because even the ancient world has a drawer for things too useful to throw away. At some point a place gains enough people for routine exchange. One household has extra onions, and another has better wool thread. Someone is skilled at shaping clay, and someone else keeps losing cooking pots with astonishing regularity. None of this looks like a founder in a bronze statue. It looks like soup thickening while somebody patches a gate. It smells of smoke, damp earth, and lentils simmered with whatever herb survives near the doorstep. You picture the hills before Rome has one name large enough for all of them. Small settlements cling to ridges and shoulders of ground. They are close enough to notice one another, and far enough to grumble. The Palatine in such days is less an eternal capital than a careful village perch. It is early Italy's most exclusive gated community, if a ditch and a fence count. The residents are deeply suspicious of the people on the next hill over. Suspicion, though, does not stop trade or marriage or borrowed tools. People complain about neighbors while using their millstones. Human consistency is one of history's great comforts. When enough of these little choices repeat across generations, a larger shape slowly appears. Paths join paths, shrines attract visits, and meeting places become expected. The city arrives like daylight through shutters, not like a trumpet blast. You rise to stretch, and your knees protest in the small scholarly way. On a nearby map, the Tiber loops through the landscape in a thick brown line. Rivers often explain what speeches later decorate. The Tiber is not the grandest river in the world, which must irritate patriotic poets. It is muddy, useful, and sometimes sulky after rain. In short, it behaves like an actual river, rather than a myth. It offers something better than beauty, which is a crossing. There is a ford where movement becomes possible without too much prayer. Goods can pause there, animals can drink there, and strangers can become temporary customers. Salt comes inland by road and track, precious and plain at the same time. It stings cracked fingers and makes dull food worth eating. A place that helps salt move will rarely stay empty for long. You can almost hear the clink of sacks and the soft complaint of pack animals. Salt dust gathers in seams and under nails. Even the air near such trade must taste faintly sharper at the lips. Cattle pass too, broad-backed and slow, leaving deep marks in the softer ground. Their smell reaches before they do, warm and grassy and entirely sincere. Herding is not glamorous, though a city may later build speeches on its patience. Where cattle move, people watch, bargain, rest, and gossip. Hooves chew up the bank, and men argue over prices with the grave focus of judges. Somewhere nearby, a child drops a crust in the mud and cries, as if the republic depends on it. Boats matter as well, though boats always look less heroic once unloaded. A river landing means ropes, wet wood, and men with damp hems. It means jars of oil, baskets of grain, skins of wine, and fish beginning to smell persuasive. A crossing place also gathers news, accents, and habits. A trader pauses long enough to mention a tool from elsewhere. A woman sees a new shape of brooch and copies it by winter. This is how places thicken into importance without ceremony. Repetition does the heavy work, while legend sleeps in. By the time poets wake, the marketplace has already set out its onions. You run a finger along the map from the river toward the hills. The distance is manageable even with a loaded donkey and a tired temper. That matters more than most prophecies. The right place is often simply the place where many inconveniences become slightly smaller. Water is near, ground is defendable, paths meet, and trade pauses. Destiny in these cases wears muddy sandals and asks for a fair price. Fulvia the archivist rushes past your doorway with 3 rolls in her arms. You ask for the Etruscan chronicle you need for cross-checking. She sighs and says it was here this morning, which somehow answers everything and nothing. The wandering scroll remains loyal only to absence. It has been definitely shelved in 4 places this week alone. You begin to suspect it enjoys scholarship as a spectator sport. Back on your table, the hills wait in their older, smaller lives. Before anyone says Rome with certainty, different groups already occupy these folds of ground. Latin communities live here, and Sabine communities do too, with all the usual overlap and fuss. Their houses are not identical, though all of them understand roof leaks perfectly. One cooking pot shape is a little more common here, another there. A pin style changes, a burial habit shifts, and some words sound different at the well. Difference in such times is rarely tidy enough for later diagrams. Families intermarry, tools travel, and customs borrow each other's cloaks. A child may grow up hearing more than one way to name the same bird. You picture morning smoke rising from several hills at once. Dogs bark, women sweep thresholds, and somebody beats a tunic with a stick. Across a dip in the ground, another household begins the same day with slightly different prayers. Little shrines gather offerings of first fruits, wool, and small-shaped cakes. Footpaths lead there from more than one settlement. Shared worship does not erase difference, but it teaches the feet where to go together. Feasts help too, because people who eat from neighboring pots remember one another. There are cups to fill, benches to drag, and children to pull from dangerous fires. Community often begins with practical concern over who is stepping in the stew. You do not need a clean boundary line to see these worlds touching. You need only a ridge, a path, and repeated reasons to cross it. Trade and marriage are excellent enemies of neat tribal charts. Even disputes, in their mild old way, create closeness. People do not argue steadily with complete strangers from very far away. They argue with those close enough to share pasture and annoy them. So the future city is not one village swelling nobly from one seed. It is several nearby communities learning, resisting, borrowing, and blending over long stretches of time. The process is less like a birth cry and more like dough coming together under many hands. The name Rome, when it finally stretches wide enough, covers older textures beneath it. Those textures do not vanish just because later writers prefer one founder. They remain in customs, cults, and the simple fact of different hills keeping their own moods. The Quirinal feels different from the Palatine even now, and every resident knows it. Steps sound different there, light falls differently there, and dinner conversation surely blames the weather differently there. Cities keep their old village bones under the skin. You sharpen your stylus again, and consider how later Romans faced this layered beginning. Layers are honest, but ceremonies dislike them. A festival wants one altar, one speech, and one day circled in red. Priests need a date for rites, magistrates need a date for records, and schoolboys need something easy to recite. Ordinary people also like a birthday. It lets them feel affection without opening a box of contradictions before breakfast. A single founding moment serves law as neatly as it serves memory. It helps define sacred boundaries and public anniversaries. It turns a spread of habits into an event fit for monuments. It also suits the Roman taste for ancestors with good posture. A founder can be praised, painted, and compared to present rulers. A century of muddy adjustment is much harder to carve in marble. Augustus understands this better than anyone breathing under his roofs. He is building Rome's finest image campaign with stone, song, and careful silence. He likes origins that point forward toward his own polished leadership. You cannot blame him too much, because every state loves a tidy family album. Rome simply commissions better poetry than most. Virgil, after all, is the original content creator, turning a refugee into national destiny over 12 patient books. Your task is gentler and trickier at once. You must keep the glow without blinding yourself to the furniture in the room. Founding stories are useful, but useful things still deserve careful dusting. Remus and Romulus belong to that useful glow. They gather many old memories into a shape people can hold. Twins, wolves, a riverbank, a coral, and a wall make excellent memory pegs. Such stories compress time the way seals compress wax. A long process receives one stamp and one figure to carry it. The result is clear, portable, and not always literal. You are not required to sneer at it, which would be tiresome at this hour. Myth often keeps truths that lists and dates cannot carry well. It remembers that Rome thinks of itself as hardy, chosen, exposed, and somehow nourished anyway. Still, when the she-wolf enters, your mind quietly opens two drawers. In one drawer sits the literal beast with milk and watchful eyes. In the other sits metaphor, tavern slang, foster care, and all the human mess beneath bright fur. The old pontiff would blush crimson if he heard that sentence formed so plainly. He once did, in fact, and went rigid with affront. For a full week, he greeted you as if you were personally undermining livestock. So you move with care between reverence and common sense. You let the tale stand, and you place it over a slower ground. Under the twins lies a river crossing, several hills, many families, and much waiting. That slower ground is not less worthy because it lacks a dramatic first page. It contains the actual labor of becoming a place. Someone must fetch water, even in the presence of destiny. Someone must salt meat, patch sandals, roof a hut, and calm a child with a splinter. Someone must decide where to pen the goats at dusk. Cities rest on those decisions far more securely than on omens. You think again of Varro and his brave exact date. His number is not useless simply because it is late. It tells you when Romans decide they need precision about their own beginnings. That need itself is a fact of history, and a revealing one. By assigning Rome a birthday, later Romans declare that their city is one body. They choose unity over the older, messier picture of joined communities. In an age of empire, that choice becomes even more attractive. One founder leads naturally toward one destiny, and one ruler's grand repair of it. The line is cleaner than truth, which is exactly why it gets repeated. Gaius returns from the shelves holding two Greek authors and a dry expression. He says neither confirms a wolf, though both confirm that Romans enjoy themselves. You thank him and do not mention Homer. He peers at your notes and asks whether you will call the date certain. You answer that you will call it traditional, calculated, and beloved. Gaius nods as if you have finally washed your hands properly. Fulvia appears next with a roll you did not request, and a face of pure endurance. It is not the Etruscan Chronicle, of course, but a tax list from Campania. She says it was here this morning, and you believe her completely. You set the wrong roll aside with tenderness, because even mistakes are old company now. The lamp flame leans and straightens in the mild draught. Wax cools under your palm, smooth as still water. Then the sentence begins to settle in your mind at last. Rome is founded in memory on a day. but in life over generations. That feels true enough to honor both the shepherd feast and the muddy path. You write that the city later fixes its birth on April 21st. You write that Varro's counting gives the famous year with admirable confidence. Then you write that the hills and river have been busy, long before the calendar catches up. You add the traffic of salt and cattle, the ford, the huts, and the patient joining of neighbors. You add the Latin and Sabine lives already woven across the ridges. You let the founder stand, but not alone. Outside, the night air cools the stones and hushes the streets a little. Somewhere below, a cart rolls past with a soft wooden groan. Rome keeps existing in the old practical way while you explain her impossible first day. At last you lay the stylus down beside the wax and rest your cramped fingers. Cedar, lamp smoke, and sour Posca share the room in peaceful agreement. The city was not founded in a single day, and somehow that makes it easier to love. You sit in your study while lamplight pools gold over stacked papyrus rolls. Cedar oil warms the air from the wooden cases. Your clay cup of Posca cools beside the wax tablet while you decide, again, to begin Rome with huts instead of heroes. Your patron wants something truthful and flattering, which is a very Roman pair of wishes. You can almost hear that polite imperial cough behind every sentence. It asks for solid facts, and also for a city grand enough to deserve marble, poetry, and a founder who never has a bad hair day. So you lower your stylus and walk backward in your mind. You leave behind Augustan stone and painted walls. You go to the Tiber bend before anyone calls it Rome, when the hills wear scrub grass and dust, and each ridge minds its own business. You stand on a narrow path where goat droppings dry in the sun. The air smells of warm earth and smoke from cooking fires. A few huts sit above you on the slope, round and low, with roofs like bundles of straw tied against the wind. You do not hear triumphs or prophecies here. You hear a dog bark once and lose interest. You hear grain being ground on stone, and a child dragging a stick through dust, with the grave purpose of someone inventing roads. The people on these hills live in what you would call the glacial way. Their houses are made from things that bend and things that pack tight. Wooden posts hold the frame. Woven branches fill the walls, and mud smooths over the gaps like thick brown icing. Inside a hut, the air sits warm and a little smoky. A hearth glows in the middle or near a wall, depending on the family's habits. Clay jars stand by the edge, and baskets hang from pegs where mice must feel deeply challenged. The roof thatch smells sweet after rain. Soot darkens the beams above your head. A sleeping mat lies near the warmer side, while loom weights and spindle whorls gather by a place where hands work wool in the afternoon. You look down and see pottery everywhere, because ordinary life always leaves broken cups behind. The local ware is thick and dark, with a rough skin and a patient weight. When a potter burnishes it with care, it gleams softly, like black bread brushed with oil. You turn a sherd in your fingers and feel tiny grit in the clay. This is impasto, sturdy and practical, which is a polite way to say it survives accidents. It holds grain, beans, water, and whatever soup appears when someone gives up on making separate dishes. The shapes are simple, because simple shapes stack well and do not argue. Wide jars sit in the hut like silent uncles. Smaller bowls travel between hand and mouth, and lids fit a little loosely, because no age has yet solved the mystery of perfect kitchen storage. When these people bury their dead, they often burn the body first. Ash and bone go into urns that stand in the ground like careful little houses. Some urns are shaped like huts themselves, which feels tender, practical, and slightly overcommitted to the home theme. You picture the small cemetery beyond the living huts. The ground holds rows of cremation burials, each with a vessel, a pin, or a cup nearby. Smoke from one world settles into clay in the next, and life continues with very little ceremony about it. A bronze fibula rests beside one urn, still curved to hold cloth at the shoulder. It is not grand jewelry in the palace sense. It is more like the useful clasp that keeps your cloak from turning you into a drafty bundle on a windy hill. These hills do not yet make one people. You feel that at once when you move from ridge to ridge. Each rise has its own tracks, its own water source, its own small habits, and its own thoughtful suspicion about the folk living one hill away. The Palatine sits with an air of old habit. Its slopes are easier than some, and its top gives room for huts and pens. You can imagine pigs rooting near senses and grain drying in the sun, while someone shouts because chickens have become critics. The Capitoline feels different under your sandals. It rises steeper and harder, with rock close under the soil. A settlement here watches its approaches more carefully, not because anyone is dramatic, but because steep ground makes people notice who is climbing toward dinner. The Esquiline spreads broader and more open, with room that feels less tucked in. It has paths that lead out toward other lands more easily. Cemeteries lie on its margins, and the living tread past the dead with the practical calm of people who have chores. You note the small differences that matter because they repeat. One hill favors a pot shape with a wider shoulder. Another places burials a little farther from the huts. A third uses pins and clasps with a style that says, very quietly, "We are ourselves here." Even the dust seems to change character from hill to hill. On one path it is mixed with ash and trampled straw. On another it hides chips of tufa and broken cup rims. Your sandal sole reads this record better than any poet, though poets are louder about it. Gaius the Greek peers over your shoulder at this point and gives a soft, worried tut. He says, "No settlement exists properly without two Greek authors noticing it first." You remind him that goats and storage pits rarely publish in Athens, and he looks unconvinced. You keep walking the ridges in your mind. The Palatine begins to resemble early Italy's most exclusive gated community. It is small, tribal, and mildly offended by the next hill over, which is the oldest known form of neighborly feeling. No wall marks a nation yet. A path, a ditch, or a cluster of graves can do that work well enough. People know where their own animals graze, where their own kin lie buried, and where a stranger should begin speaking politely before drawing water. On the Palatine you see huts gathered in a way that suggests kin close at hand. Post holes mark circles and ovals where walls once stood. The floor levels sit packed hard by feet, and bits of charcoal stay trapped in the earth like forgotten evening shadows. On the Capitoline, the traces are fewer and sharper, as if space is more selective there. You find cut rock, small leveling works, and signs that people choose their spots carefully. A steep hill makes every building decision feel like furniture moved by committee. The Esquiline offers a wider scatter of clues. There are graves, huts, and activity areas that sit with more room between them. It feels less like one cluster around one hearth, and more like a broad shoulder carrying several habits at once. This is where your wax tablet begins to fill with plain words that make old men nervous. You write post holes, you write storage pits, you write burned layers and soil stains, and you can already sense the old pontiff turning pink from several streets away. He does arrive, of course, and he does read over your shoulder. He grows flushed when you suggest the she-wolf may be a metaphor. When you add that post holes matter more than omens for this chapter, he leaves in the same silent outrage as before. Still, the ground keeps speaking in its calm little way. A ring of dark soil shows where a wooden post once stood. A shallow pit lined with clay tells you grain waited there against damp. A heap of animal bones says someone enjoyed supper and did not file a report. You kneel beside a storage pit in your thoughts and see how ordinary it is. Its mouth is narrow, and its belly widens below the floor. Grain keeps better in such cool, dark pockets, though opening them probably sends up enough dust to make everyone sneeze together. Near one hut, a patch of reddened earth marks a hearth or oven. Nearby lie spindle whorls, loom weights, and broken cups. You do not need a legend to tell you that people sleep, eat, mend, spin, scold, and spill things here quite successfully. Bronze fibulae help more than they look as if they should. Their shapes change over time in small, fussy ways. One has a simple bow, another coils more neatly, and a third curves like a careful little serpent that exists mainly to hold your cloak shut. You line these clasp types up in your notes like stubborn cousins at a family meal. They help you place one burial before another. They also remind you that fashion begins very early, and mostly as a way of fastening wool without appearing careless. In another place, objects lie in the ground where nobody loses them by accident. A cup rests near a spring. A small bronze piece sits in a crack between stones. These are votive deposits, quiet gifts placed where water, boundary, or habit makes a place feel noticed. You do not need temple columns for this kind of offering. A spring with clear water and cool shade is enough. A tree near a track can gather reverence very nicely, especially if it also gathers gossip, shade, and a safe place to rest a heavy jar. The wandering scroll would help here because it mentions an old Etruscan note on hill shrines. It has now been definitively shelved in 4 places and is present in none. Fulvia the archivist passes at a half jog and sighs that it was here this morning, she promises you. So you return to what the soil gives freely. In one hollow you find burned offerings mixed with pottery. In another you see pebbles, bones, and cups arranged too neatly for mere rubbish. Even early people know the difference between throwing things away and setting them down with care. These traces do not make a grand tale by themselves. They make something better for a scholar trying to stay honest. They make a lived world where a bent pin, a cracked jar, and a patch of ash carry more truth than 100 improved speeches. Once you have walked the huts and graves, you start noticing objects that come from farther away. A pot shape looks more Etruscan than local. A bronze piece suggests hands from Campania. Somewhere a bead or cup whispers that the hills are not cut off, only small. The Tiber bend helps with that. It is not a grand harbor yet, but it is a useful crossing and a useful route. Salt, wool, metal, and stories all travel better when a river and a ford agree to cooperate for once. You picture traders arriving in the least heroic way possible. They come dusty, hungry, and interested in local prices. One brings worked bronze, another brings finer pottery or odd ornaments, and everyone on the hill tries very hard to appear casually interested. To the north, Etruria sends ideas as well as goods. Metalwork improves, shapes travel, and habits in burial or display drift south by slow degrees. No one hill signs a treaty with a pen and wax seal, but imitation works perfectly well without official paperwork. From the south, Campania offers its own pull-through routes of exchange. Goods move along coast and inland paths, then pass from hand to hand. By the time a small bronze bowl reaches a hilltop home, it already has the tired dignity of a seasoned traveler. Then come the Greek colonies with their painted pots and their talent for being noticed. Pithecusae and Cumae sit farther off, but their wares and ways ripple inland. Gaius grows brighter whenever this happens, because at last a Greek author may sniff around the edge of your chapter. You let him enjoy the moment for a breath. Then you point out that imported things are still rare among local cooking jars and rough bowls. One painted cup does not turn a hill village into a symposium, especially when the soup remains mostly beans. Trade touches dress as well as table. A fibula style shifts because someone sees a finer one elsewhere. Amber beads turn up from astonishingly far away, which always feels slightly unfair to ordinary pebbles. Bronze tools show better casting, and knives hold a cleaner edge. These objects travel because people do. Shepherds move herds seasonally. Traders follow paths between hilltops, river crossings, and coastal markets. Brides marry out, servants move with households, and children grow up hearing place names that stretch beyond the next ridge. You stand by a path where cart ruts harden in dry ground. Hooves pass here, and sandals and bare feet toughen by habit. A bundle of wool goes one way, a lump of salt another, and news travels in every direction without ever paying a courier. As goods move, tastes move too. A local potter copies a handle shape first seen on a foreign cup. A smith tries a new curve on a clasp. Soon an object on one hill looks less strange on the next, and the neighbors begin borrowing from each other with perfect innocence. This is how separate places start leaning inward without admitting it. Repeated meetings make familiar faces. Familiar faces lead to marriages, bargains, feast days, and the kind of grudging trust that still checks the measure of grain twice. You feel that slow pull most clearly in the valleys between the hills. Paths converge there because feet prefer ease. Animals are watered there, goods are swapped there, and someone always knows whose cousin has too many goats and might sell one after the next moon. The low ground is not yet the grand forum of stone speeches. It is wetter, rougher, and far more interested in mud than marble. Still, it works as common space in a loose and growing way, which is how many important Roman habits begin. Season by season, the hill communities find reasons to meet again. They share grazing edges, market days, and shrines that sit where no single household can claim them. A festival meal in one year becomes expected custom in the next, and custom is the strongest mortar you have. You notice, too, that cemeteries and settlement edges shift over time. Space once kept apart begins to feel less sharply guarded. One cluster of huts expands, another sends people toward a neighboring slope, and the empty space between them grows less like a border and more like a lane. Nothing here happens in one bright founding instant. No trumpet sounds over the first committee meeting of future Romans. The hills drift together the way wool fibers catch in spinning, separate at first, then harder and harder to pull apart without making a mess. The Palatine still keeps its old confidence. The Capitoline still sits apart with rocky dignity. The Esquiline still spreads broad and busy, but the old suspicion softens at the edges because trade, marriage, worship, and convenience are patient persuaders. Convenience may be the greatest founder of cities, though statues never thank it. A shared path saves time. A common market saves effort. A nearby ally helps during flood, drought, or missing livestock, which is the ancient version of borrowing a cup of something and never returning the bowl. When you write this down, it sounds almost too modest for Rome. Yet modest beginnings suit the evidence best. Before eagles and standards and grand old claims, you have clusters of huts, ashen urns, careful storage, and neighbors slowly deciding each other are useful. Augustus would prefer a cleaner launch, no doubt. He is running Rome's finest rebranding campaign with marble, monuments, and official poetry. Still, even the city's founding CEO must start with a site survey, a few practical allies, and someone arguing about whose boundary ditch goes where. Virgil can have his noble refugee and his long river of fate. You, in this chapter, keep your feet in dust. You watch smoke lift from separate hilltops, and then notice how the trails between them thicken, step by ordinary step. You return in your mind to the Palatine at dusk. Cooking smoke lies low, and dogs curl near doorways. A woman shakes crumbs from a cloth, a man checks a pen latch, and children carry kindling that is mostly sticks and partly ambition. Across the folds of ground, another fire answers from the Esquiline, a third glows from the Capitoline. They are still separate hearths, but they belong to one landscape now, and the spaces between them are no longer empty in the old suspicious way. That, you think, is where the wolf story later settles its pause. It comes after the hills have already learned to face one another. Myth gives the city a dramatic birthday, but the earth gives it a long childhood of mud walls, trade paths, and shared habits. You set down your stylus and flex your cramped fingers. The cedar smell returns, and the posca has gone flat in the cup. Outside, Augustan Rome hums over all those buried huts, and beneath the marble you still sense the round houses sleeping patiently in the soil. Gaius reads the page and tuts only once this time. Fulvia rushes past and says the missing scroll was here this morning. She promises you. You smile, add one more line about the hills drawing together, and decide that truth can be flattering when you let Rome begin as humanly as it does. You set your stylus down when the cedar smell grows stronger than the ink. Lamplight lies in gold pools across your papyrus rolls. A clay cup of cooling posca waits by your hand with the sour patience of a faithful clerk. Outside, the Palatine rises in the dusk, and all its marble faces look very sure of themselves. You are meant to write Rome's first mornings in a way that is true and flattering. It is an awkward order. Truth likes dust on its sandals. Flattery prefers polished stone and a clean lineage that never misplaces a goat. You rub a thumb over the wax on your tablet and think of the oldest story. A river, a basket, a she-wolf, twins with excellent hair for abandoned babies. It is all very memorable, which is usually your first warning. Gaius the Greek clears his throat beside the shelves with a sound like a disapproving kettle. He says he will accept no Roman source without 2 Greek witnesses and a decent pedigree. He mutters that Homer covered all important human matters already, which is a bold claim when you consider Roman taxes. You ignore him for a moment and look again at the hill. The strange thing about the Palatine is not that stories gather there. The strange thing is that the hill keeps offering up small, stubborn signs that somebody truly lives there very early. You picture the ground beneath the porticos and painted walls. You picture marble lifting like a lid from a storage jar. You picture layer after layer of floors, ashes, nails, plaster, and forgotten crumbs of daily life. Then you picture a much later morning with workmen and trowels. The year is far beyond your own, though your sleepy mind does not trouble over the leap. In 1948, Gianfilippo Caratoni stands on the Palatine and studies cuts in the soil that look too regular to ignore. You kneel there with him in imagination, and the earth is warm through your robe. Dust gathers in the folds at your knees. The sun sits high. The trowel makes a soft scraping sound that is almost the cousin of your stylus on wax. The hill does not first reveal a wall or a grand gate. It reveals dark stains and neat hollows. It reveals the sort of evidence that can make a great city begin with something very like careful gardening. Caratoni and his team clear the volcanic soil inch by inch. The earth keeps the marks of old posts better than you expect. Under all the later building, the tufa and packed layers preserve circles, slots, and floor traces with quiet loyalty. You can almost feel the pause when someone notices the pattern. A line of holes curves where a wall should curve. Another line answers it. A floor level sits between them, compact and used, like a place where feet return home every evening. That pause is one of history's gentlest pleasures. Nobody is crowned, no trumpet plays. A person simply stops with a trowel in hand and thinks, "Oh, this may be a house." Later, in the 1980s, other archaeologists come back to the same hill. They open more trenches through the deep stack of time. They find more signs that the early settlement is not one lonely hut, but a small cluster of dwellings on the crest and slopes. You follow them in your mind through taped squares and spoil heaps. The ground smells dry and mineral. Buckets knock lightly against one another. Every scrape carries the mild hope of meeting a line that another human hand once cut. The great surprise is not that Rome has an early village. Most old places begin with huts, smoke, and practical shoes. The surprise is that the traces lie under imperial stone, almost directly beneath palaces built by men who enjoy being compared with gods. You know this taste for grandeur very well. Augustus is running what you might gently call Rome's first full rebranding campaign. He has marble, monuments, state poetry, and a personal interest in the city's founding chief executive. That makes the little traces below feel even smaller. A capital that reaches from Spain to Syria rests in one sense over post holes. The old pontiff once left your study in flushed silence when you used that word, as if post holes were a personal insult. You still think it is an excellent word. It sounds honest. It does not try to wear a laurel wreath. It simply tells you that once, in this place, a post stood up and did its work. You lean closer to those dark cuts in the ground. The holes are not grand, but they are legible. Their spacing tells you where wall posts rise. Their curve tells you the house is oval or rounded, not a neat Roman box with firm opinions. A floor survives as a thin level of beaten earth. It sits low and plain. It has no mosaic to distract you. It remembers pressure, ash, and the repeated ordinary weight of a body crossing from bed to door. Some huts seem only a few meters across. One famous footprint of a dwelling is so humble that your own study feels almost boastful by comparison. A space near 3 meters wide can hold a fire, a stool, a basket, and not much room for vanity. You picture the walls as wattled branches smeared with clay. You picture a roof of thatch tied over poles and rafters. You picture smoke slipping up through the roofline with the resigned air of a thing that has done this every day for years. The post holes show more than shape. They show rebuilding. A post comes out, another goes in nearby. The floor rises slightly after use, and another surface is laid, because people are very good at living in one place long enough to make a mess. That, more than any legend, feels intimate. A myth arrives already dressed for dinner. A floor level arrives in work clothes with dust on its hem. You notice how many tiny decisions a hut asks of its builder. Where does the doorway face? How steep is the roof? Which post must go deeper, because the wind worries that side? Where do you shake crumbs from the rushes? These are good questions because they are not heroic. They are the questions of people who wait cold, patch leaks, and keep grain dry. History often grows kinder when it smells faintly of smoke and damp straw. A few traces of hearth use and household rubbish help the picture along. You can almost hear a pot settle on coals. You can almost see broken bits of coarse ware tipped into a corner outside. Occupation has its own untidy handwriting. The settlement pattern matters too. These huts do not sit alone in a romantic emptiness. They belong to a small hilltop community, close enough for shared paths, stray goats, and the gentle suspicion of whoever lives on the next hill. The Palatine is early Italy's most exclusive gated community in embryo. The gate is mostly steep ground and attitude. The residents are few, practical, and probably convinced that everyone on the Aventine is doing something slightly incorrect with beams. When you think of Romulus, this is the soil you want under his feet. Not a marble terrace, not a triumphal stare, a worn patch of earth near simple houses where smoke clings to wool and everybody notices if your roof sags. That does not prove twins, of course. Archaeology is patient but not magical. It does not hand you a wolf skin, a basket receipt, or a signed statement from Mars. What it gives you is steadier. It gives you a real inhabited hill in the right broad period. It gives you the shape of domestic life on the Palatine before Rome becomes Rome in the large, trumpet-loving sense. Back in your study, you draw a small oval in wax. Gaius makes a doubtful sound when you say a hut trace may matter more than a poet's flourish. He asks whether two Greek authors mention the post holes, which is his idea of wit. You do not reward him with a glance. Instead, you think of the Casa Romuli, the hut of Romulus, which your own city still tends as a sacred thing. This is where the soil and the story clasp hands in a very Roman way. You have seen the hut, or what Rome insists on preserving as the hut. It sits with thatch and simplicity among monuments that prefer applause. It is maintained not as a comfortable home, but as a relic, almost like a civic cradle with a roof. The odd beauty lies in the repairs. When the hut decays, Romans do not improve it into fashion. They do not add marble trim, painted panels, or a tasteful little colonnade to help the visitors feel important. They repair it as it always has been. Fresh reeds go on the roof, worn parts are replaced in kind, a post is renewed with another post, and the whole city agrees, for once, to keep its hands off the ornament. That agreement tells you nearly as much as any excavation. Rome is a city deeply in love with enlargement. It likes roads longer, baths bigger, names louder, and ancestors better connected. Yet here it chooses deliberate smallness. It chooses a rough hut on the hill where emperors build palaces. It chooses to remember that before the marble comes the mud, before the portico comes the pole. There is something almost touching in that restraint. A people who can cover a slope in stone still stop to rethatch a roof. A state that commissions 12 books from Virgil, ancient Rome's most successful content creator, also keeps a hut looking modest. You suspect the modesty is useful. A humble beginning flatters the end result. If the founder starts in straw, then the emperor in marble looks like destiny, rather than expensive taste. Still, usefulness does not cancel sincerity. Ritual repairs take time and care. Somebody fetches reeds, somebody binds them. Somebody judges whether this patch matches the old line, which is a surprisingly tender form of patriotism. You imagine the workers doing it year after year. Their hands smell of dry grass and rope. Bits of chaff cling to their sleeves. They stand under the same hill where elite sandals click over polished floors and servants carry silver dishes indoors. The gap between hut and palace is only a few layers of ground. Above the little floor impressions rise halls with painted walls, fountains, gardens, and all the restful noises of wealth, trying not to look too pleased with itself. That contrast has a kind of sweetness. You can walk from the memory of a 3-meter hut to the edge of imperial luxury in a short afternoon. Rome stacks its self-image like folded tunics, with the oldest and plainest at the bottom. On the Palatine, the founder's home stays tiny by choice. It is not forced to remain poor by lack of means. It remains poor because Romans think the poverty itself says something important about endurance, virtue, and native stock. Even when the hut burns or decays, the answer is the same. You do not make it grander after damage. You do not seize the chance to modernize. You restore the old shape again, as if loyalty lives best in thatch. Most buildings chase improvement with great enthusiasm and alarming invoices. The Casa Romuli instead becomes a lesson in leaving well enough alone, which may be Rome's least usual virtue. You smile because the lesson is almost impolite. The palace above says, "Look how far we have come." The hut below says, "Yes, but do not become unbearable about it." Fulvia, the archivist, sweeps past your door at a half-jog with 3 scrolls in her arms. You ask for the Etruscan Chronicle on old hill settlements. She sighs, says it was here this morning, and disappears again into the stacks where the wandering scroll enjoys its 4th retirement. You are left with the hut and your thoughts. The Casa Romuli does not survive because nobody notices it. It survives because generations decide to notice it on purpose. That choice matters more than the exact location of every post. Romans preserve what they want to remember about themselves. They remember conquest and arches and laws in bronze, but they also remember a founder under a rough roof. There is a mild discipline in that memory. The hut asks the viewer to stoop a little, to lower the eye, to accept that greatness once sits on a packed floor. The body must adapt to the scale before the mind does. You think of the repairs after storms. A hard rain darkens the thatch. Wind lifts the edges. Some season of neglect opens a weakness, and then men come with fresh materials and careful hands. They do not ask whether the founder deserves a tiled roof now. They act as if continuity itself is sacred. The old form is the offering. You can see why later excavations matter so much to modern eyes. When 20th century archaeologists uncover actual hut traces beneath the hill, the old Roman insistence stops looking merely ceremonial. It begins to look like cultural memory anchored, however loosely, to a real early landscape. Not perfect memory, of course. Memory is a cook who always seasons too much. It adds wolves and omens, removes drafty corners, and somehow forgets where it put the practical details. Yet memory still keeps the outline. A hut on the Palatine, a founder linked to that hut. A city that refuses to let the image vanish even when the neighborhood becomes absurdly expensive. You walk in your mind through those later trenches once more. The marble revetments above cast cool shade. Down below, the earth shows older curves and levels, simple enough to be missed by anyone chasing statuary or inscriptions. But you are learning to trust small marks. A hole cut for a post can outlast speeches. A floor patch can outlast a family line. Soil is very good at keeping secrets in plain sight. The house traces also make the legend feel local, rather than floating. Romulus belongs to a specific hill with practical dwelling space, not to a vague shining past. He belongs to a neighborhood where roofs need tying down before weather shifts. That is useful for your book. Your patron wants something truthful and flattering, and here, at last, both can sit together without kicking each other under the table. The truth is humble. A flattery is that Rome remembers its humble truth. You dip the stylus again and write more carefully. You do not say the hut proves every line of the tale. You say the Palatine holds early homes of the right age, and the city preserves one home's image with reverent stubbornness. That stubbornness is Roman to the bone. It is the same trait that measures roads straight and family honor longer than comfort. Here it chooses not conquest, but continuity, which makes it strangely tender. Gaius reads over your shoulder and tuts at Livy. He says a hut tradition proves only that Romans adore origins. You tell him this origin is not tidy at all, which is precisely why it deserves your affection. Outside, evening settles on the hill. The palace roofs catch the last light in soft bands. Somewhere a servant closes shutters. Somewhere reeds on an old sacred roof hold the day's warmth a little longer. You like that Rome keeps both surfaces. It keeps the polished stone for ceremony and the imagined smoke-dark rafters for conscience. One tells the world what Rome has become, the other tells Rome what it wants to believe it once was, and perhaps what it truly was, at least in outline. A cluster of huts, a busy hilltop, posts set into volcanic ground, floors beaten hard by daily use. The beginning is never neat, but it is often domestic. So when you ask whether Remus and Romulus are myth or history, the hut answers in the gentlest way. It says the names belong to story, the setting belongs to earth. The city begins in a place where ordinary people cook, mend, sleep, and watch the roof for leaks. That may be the most Roman answer possible. A legend gives Rome its face. A hut gives Rome its feet. You sit back and listen to the soft scratch of your own final lines. The cedar oil is faint now. The Pascha is flat and warm. The Palatine keeps its marble silence above the older, smaller memory underfoot. You are almost grateful for the post holes. They save the founder from becoming too smooth. They remind the palace where it comes from. They let a great city rest, for a moment, inside a room scarcely larger than a bed. And in that little room, your account grows calmer. You leave space for the wolf, because Rome loves her. You leave space for the hut, because the hill asks for it. Between them you find something gentle enough to call the beginning. You smooth a curled strip of papyrus with your palm and watch the lamplight settle on it. The study smells of cedar oil and old fiber. A clay cup of cooling Pascha waits by your elbow. Somewhere behind you, a stylus scratches on wax with the patient sound of a beetle crossing bark. You are meant to answer Rome's oldest question without upsetting anyone important. That is a very Roman kind of task. You are asked for the truth and also for something flattering enough to please a patron. You sit between honesty and good manners, which is where most scholars spend their best hours. You look up at the stacked scrolls and think how large cities always want a tidy beginning. A goat pen can begin by accident. A village can begin because cousins stop walking and start planting beans. A great city wants something better dressed than that, with omens, gods, and a clear sense of purpose. Rome especially wants it. Rome spills over hills and markets and shrines with the confidence of a place that assumes the world will make room. Yet you know how mixed and patched it truly is. One hill watches another hill with the careful look of a neighbor counting borrowed bowls. The Palatine is not yet a marble postcards in your mind. It begins as a small settlement on a slope. It is early Italy's most exclusive gated community, except the gate is mostly a ditch and a lot of suspicion. Everyone inside thinks the people on the next hill have questionable habits. That is why a founder matters. A founder gathers loose beginnings into one strong hand. A founder turns old huts, muddy paths, and tribal grudges into a story with direction. A founder lets later Romans say they are not random people, but chosen people. You tap the end of your stylus against your front tooth and stare at that word. Chosen is very useful. It makes taxes feel like destiny and road building feel like a sacred duty. It lets men in clean white togas act as if the gods personally enjoy administrative order. Across the table, Gaius the Greek gives a small tut without lifting his head. He is copying a note from a Greek source onto a wax tablet. He does not accept any Roman report without 2 Greek witnesses and a sigh. He mutters that Homer covers most things already, which is a comforting lie, he tells himself. You let him mutter. Even he knows a city as ambitious as Rome cannot simply say, we appeared somehow. Carthage does not say that. Greek colonies do not say that. Alba Longa certainly does not say that, because old Latin towns love a family tree almost as much as they love a boundary stone. You reach for another roll and feel the dry dust on your fingertips. The papyrus edge is soft with use. The string that ties it is greasy from many hands. The title tag leans sideways, as if even the label is tired of this argument. A founder myth answers practical questions while pretending to answer sacred ones. Why do you rule? Why do you march? Why do you hold so hard to your laws, your walls, and your ceremonies? Why should anyone believe that Rome is meant for more than a good harvest and a quiet market day? So the myth gives Rome not one answer, but several tucked inside each other. It gives a city born from kings and exiles. It gives twins exposed to hardship and then spared. It gives divine blood without too much softness, because Rome dislikes looking pampered. You pause over the most youthful divine name of all. Mars sits on the page like a stamped seal, gentle household spirit with figs and warm bread. He is sharp, public, and useful to a people who plan to expand until someone politely asks them to stop. You can almost hear the politics humming beneath the ink. If Rome's founder comes from Mars, then Roman boldness looks inherited rather than greedy. Expansion becomes family business. A city that moves its borders can say it is only growing into its proper shape, like a child outgrowing sandals. Gaius clicks his tongue at that idea. He prefers Greek founders who consult oracles, sail neatly, and establish colonies with a handbook and a sacrifice. Greek apoikiai like a founder who seems organized. Rome prefers a founder who looks half wild, half chosen, and very hard to discourage. You dip your stylus and note how Mars solves several problems at once. He gives noble blood to children with a difficult beginning. He links war to duty instead of appetite. He lets Romans imagine that drill grounds, standards, and stern faces all descend from the cradle. It is a cradle of a strange kind, of course. No soft wool coverlets appear first. No grandmother croons over olive oil and swaddling bands. The story puts the children at the river's edge, close to mud, reeds, and chance. That roughness is not a flaw. You know Romans admire endurance the way some men admire polished silver. If your founder begins in danger and hunger, then later comfort looks earned rather than inherited. You rub a smear of wax from your thumb and think about infants, baskets, and river water. A basket is never as neat as the painters make it. It smells of wet rushes and river silt. The weave bites lightly into the skin and the rim leaves a little mark where fingers grip too long. The she-wolf enters there, and the whole room changes around her. Even the lamp seems to burn lower when you picture the cave. You imagine cool stone, damp earth, milk scent, and the sleepy sound of animals shifting on paws. It is one of those scenes everyone knows and no one can quite stop polishing. The old story works because the beast is both frightening and nourishing. Rome likes that combination very much. It admires a hard face over a loyal heart. It wants to think of itself as fierce enough to bare teeth, yet dependable enough to feed its own. You can see why later Romans cling to her. A she-wolf says the city survives by toughness before comfort. She gives milk without lace, shelter without softness, and love without many speeches. She is an animal version of the Roman parent who hands you boots and says feelings are available after supper. There is also the word itself, which makes the room a little warmer. A lupa can mean a wolf. It can also mean a woman of a certain profession, which gives scholars many happy afternoons. The old pontiff grows pink whenever you mention this, which is one of your smaller joys. He once stands in this very doorway, clutching his shawl, while you say the wolf might be a symbol. His nostrils widen at once. His ears redden with priestly determination. When you add that the earliest settlement leaves post holes and hearth ash more reliably than miracles, he leaves in silent outrage. You miss him as soon as he goes. He brings a useful kind of resistance. Rome needs believers as much as it needs clever readers. A myth only matters if ordinary people can feel it in their bones and not just in their footnotes. So you do not pry the she-wolf apart too much. You let her remain fur and symbol at once. That is often how old stories survive. They are sturdy enough to hold two meanings without dropping either. She also gives Romans a family portrait they deeply enjoy. Not rich infants in bright cloth. Not palace babies scented with myrrh. Two foundlings fed by a wild nurse in a cave, which is a very effective way to claim moral muscle before breakfast. You write that down in a cleaner hand. The she-wolf tells Romans they are hardened, not pampered. She tells them they are nurtured by danger and made strong by rough care. She tells them tenderness can arrive with claws attached. That matters in a city forever balancing pride and anxiety. Rome wants greatness, yet it fears softness. It wants refinement, yet it boasts about old plain ways. It eats from silver and praises cabbage, often in the same breath. The myth helps with that contradiction. You can build marble temples and still pretend your best self lives in a hut. You can commission epics and still praise old farm virtues. Augustus understands this perfectly, which is why his whole age feels like Rome's first full rebranding campaign. He gives you marble, monuments, and a careful return to simple values. It is a neat trick. It is rather like putting rough wool over expensive furniture and calling it modesty. You admire the effort, even while you note the polish. At this point, Fulvia hurries past your door with 3 scrolls and a keyring. She is forever half jogging through the archive stacks. Her sandals slap the floor in quick, tired beats. When you ask for the Etruscan Chronicle, she sighs and says it was here this morning. She promises you. The wandering scroll continues its private religious life somewhere beyond known geography. You suspect it has founded its own colony in a shelf crack. Gaius says if 2 Greek authors cannot find it, then perhaps it never exists. You tell him that is an unhelpful standard for Roman paperwork. You return to the harder part of the story. Cities usually like a founder who unites people and then dies politely off stage. Rome keeps a founder who quarrels with his brother. It keeps a death at the center of the tale, and that is not carelessness. You know later Romans wince at it. You can feel the discomfort in the way some writers hurry past the line. Some soften the reason. Some shift the blame slightly, as if tidying a rug over an uneven floor, but the rough edge remains because it is doing important work. Remus crosses a boundary and pays for it. The boundary may be a ditch, a wall line, or a sacred furrow. However the version runs, the lesson stays very firm beneath the details. A city cannot live if its own people laugh at its limits. You press your finger into the wax tablet and leave a moon-shaped dent. Boundaries begin as marks in soil. Then they become habits, rules, shrines, offices, and all the many invisible fences that let strangers live side by side. Rome knows this in its bones. A pomerium is not much to look at from a distance. It is a line, a right, a claim. Yet lines make markets possible, homes safe, and neighbors less likely to settle chicken disputes with endless shouting. So the myth teaches with family because family reaches deepest. If a stranger jumps your wall, you are annoyed. If your own brother mocks it, the insult cuts sharper. The story says the city's greatest danger does not come first from outside enemies, but from contempt within. That is the hidden warning folded inside the founding. Do not tear at the common boundary. Do not treat the city's sacred limits as a joke. Civil strife begins with people who think shared rules are beneath them. Rome has long memories for that sort of fear. You live in an age that praises peace, because earlier Romans spent too much energy disagreeing with one another at sword length. You need not dwell on those events to feel their shadow. The myth has already prepared the moral in a safer and older form. Remus becomes a lesson before he becomes a brother. That sounds cold, but Roman stories are often practical in that way. They preserve affection and warning together. They let grief sit beside instruction, like two guests on the same bench. You imagine the first boundary as simple work. There is a plow. There are clods of damp earth turned over in strips. A man's calves are dusty. The ox breathes warm into the morning air, and small stones click under a sandal heel. Then someone steps across at the wrong moment. That small movement carries a larger meaning than the motion itself. Romans are excellent at giving ordinary acts enormous civic weight. It is one of their more exhausting and effective habits. The old pontiff would say the line matters because the gods witness it. You would say the line matters because people need it. You are both correct, which is mildly irritating in the best scholarly way. Rome often wraps practical wisdom in divine cloth, so no one feels too ordinary about obeying it. That is why the death is not a flaw in the tale. It is the tale's stern little hinge. Without it, the founding is all omen and rescue and picturesque livestock. With it, the myth explains the cost of mocking civic order. Greek stories often place tension elsewhere. A colony founder may consult Delphi, choose a site, divide land, and start counting storage jars. Of course, because humans bring quarrels the way ships bring ropes. Yet the model often stresses planned departure and sanctioned settlement. Rome chooses a more intimate warning. Its danger is not failed sailing or a bad harbor. Its danger is kinship turned inward against itself. The myth says a city rises only when private rivalry stops, where the boundary begins. Carthage offers another useful contrast when you turn the idea over. There too you find craft, omen, and territorial wit. You remember the oxhide cut into strips to mark more ground, which is exactly the kind of clever real estate story cities adore. Founders like to appear favored, but they also like to appear smart. Alba Longa leans more heavily on lineage and inheritance. Old Latin memory loves descent, succession, and the handing on of sacred weight. Rome borrows from that world and then sharpens it. It adds exposure, wild nursing, divine paternity, and a brother's fatal mistake. The result is not gentle, but it is unforgettable. You see why it sticks in the Roman mind like burrs in wool. Every piece serves a civic purpose. Every strange image doubles as an answer to a political need. Why Mars? Because Rome means to fight and win without blushing. Why the she-wolf? Because Romans want to see themselves as tough children of hardship. Why Remus's end? Because unity inside the boundary matters more than family feeling outside it. You set your stylus down and flex your stiff fingers. The joints feel warm and a little swollen. Ink darkens the side of your hand. The posca has gone flat and sour in the cup, but you drink it anyway, because scholarship rarely rewards fussiness. When you look again at the whole tale, you see an identity kit laid out in pieces, chosen by omens, descended from power, hardened by exposure, nourished by something fierce, disciplined by sacred limits, obligated to build something larger than personal comfort. That last part may matter most. A founder myth tells people not only where they come from, but what they owe. Romans do not use this story to excuse laziness. They use it to demand effort, sacrifice, and a very brisk acceptance of public duty. Even the pleasant parts feel stern when you sit with them. Divine favor does not mean an easy life. Rescue does not lead to idleness. Survival itself becomes a kind of contract, as if being spared means you must go on and justify the trouble. You can feel how useful that is in an imperial age. Augustus wants Romans to think greatness is both inherited and required. He wants past hardship to bless present order. He wants the founding to lead naturally to his own calm, stable, beautifully managed now. Virgil has already done elegant work in that direction. He is Rome's finest content creator, though you would not say that aloud at dinner. He takes a refugee from a losing war and turns him into the glittering root of Roman destiny. It is commissioned art with very good meter. Your own task is humbler and dustier. You sort versions, you compare dates, you note which details appear late, and which cling stubbornly to older practice. It is less glorious than epic verse, though your back pains are surely more authentic. Still, the myth breathes most clearly when you stop treating it like a puzzle to solve. Myth is not always a false answer. Sometimes it is a social answer. It tells a people how to feel about their city while pretending merely to tell them how the city began. You trace the margin beside the name Romulus. The fibers catch lightly under your nail. A tiny flake of lamp soot falls near the line and smudges when you brush it. The page feels fragile, yet the idea on it has outlived many sturdier things. Romans need this founder because Rome itself is never simple. It is old and new at once. It is village memory wrapped in imperial scale. It is brutal in reputation, orderly in pride, and always very eager to say that both qualities are somehow virtuous. So the myth teaches Romans how to admire themselves without seeming vain. They are not rich by accident, but chosen. They are not hard because they lack feeling, but because they survive rough beginnings. They are not strict because they enjoy rules, but because cities die when brothers mock the line. Gaius finally looks up and asks whether any of it truly happens. You smile into the lamplight before answering. Truth, you tell him, sometimes arrives wearing ceremony like a good cloak. He sighs in Greek, which is one of his more polished skills. You know the literal question will never rest. Did twins exist? Did a wolf nurse them? Did Mars visit a mortal mother? Did one brother leap a wall line exactly so? The page will keep receiving those questions as long as Rome keeps making readers. But another question matters more tonight. Why does Rome keep choosing this story when easier stories are available? Why keep the awkward brother, the wild nurse, the muddy exposure, and the stern god? Why not select a cleaner founder with better manners? Because Rome wants a founder who matches its self-portrait. Not innocent but destined, not sheltered but tempered, not merely lucky but favored and tested, not peaceful in origin, yet always insisting that order is the goal. That is the deep comfort the tale offers. It says hardship can become honor. It says fierce care can still be care. It says rules are sacred because without them even brothers become strangers. Outside, the city settles into late evening sounds. You hear a cart rumble faintly over stone. A dog barks once and loses interest. In the court below, someone tips wash water into a drain with the soft slap of a small domestic conclusion. Inside, your lamp pools gold across the papyrus rolls. The cedar cases breathe out their dry, sweet smell. Wax cools in shallow tablets beside your hand. Your notes gather like neat little walls around the answer you have been circling. Rome needs a founder myth, because empire is too large to feel like an accident. It needs parents, omens, milk, mud, and a warning line in the earth. It needs a beginning that explains ambition and disciplines it at the same time. You lift your stylus once more and make the sentence plain. Rome tells itself it is born from the god of war, fed by a wild mother, and chastened by a broken brotherhood. In that one severe cradle, Romans find permission, caution, and duty all together. Then you breathe and let the ink dry. You steady one papyrus roll with your left hand and smooth another with your right. The lamplight pools gold across the desk. Cedar oil drifts from the wooden cases. Your clay cup of cooling Posca waits by your elbow, with the patient smell of sour wine. You are supposed to answer Rome's oldest question with a face of calm certainty. Your patron wants truth. Your patron also wants compliments for the city. You learn that these are sometimes the same thing, and sometimes cousins who avoid each other at dinner. Tonight you begin with Troy, because Rome keeps insisting on it. The wax under your stylus turns soft near the lamp. The point leaves neat dark lines. You write Aeneas first, because Romulus and Remus rarely stay alone for long. Gaius the Greek hears the name and gives one careful little tut from the shelf. He is sorting copied verses into piles that only he understands. He mutters that Homer covered all of this already, which is his way of saying you are late. You let him mutter, because he is useful in the way a pebble is useful in a sandal. He keeps you aware of every step. He also refuses to accept any Roman source without 2 Greek nods of approval, as if history needs a chaperone. You picture the old story as the scroll presents it to you. Troy burns in the distance of memory. Aeneas escapes with his father on his shoulders and his household gods in hand. The scene arrives already polished, like a bowl rubbed smooth by many kitchens. The Greeks know him first as a Trojan survivor. That matters more than the exact route of his sandals. It gives him a place inside their great shared story. It lets Roman listeners enter the room through a side door that Greeks already recognize. You pause to trim the lamp wick with a small bronze pick. A little thread of smoke rises. The room smells briefly singed, then settles again into wax oil and dry papyrus dust. Aeneas travels because heroes in old tales are rarely allowed to sit quietly. You follow him across the sea from line to line. A storm sends him wandering. A prophecy keeps nudging him westward. Every shore offers a meal, a warning, or a delay. In your mind, the journey is less grand than the poets make it. You imagine damp cloaks drying over a fire. You imagine hard bread softened in broth. You imagine sand inside sandals for weeks, which no epic singer mentions often enough. When he reaches Latium, the story grows local and suddenly very useful. Italian soil receives him. Latin kings notice him. Marriage ties him to the land. The foreign guest becomes an ancestor, which is a splendid trick when it works. You rub a thumb over the edge of the scroll. The papyrus has a furry softness where many fingers have lifted it. The ink is a little faded at the fold. Time has handled these claims before you do. The old Trojan cycle does not begin as a Roman family record. That is the clever part. Romans do not invent Aeneas from nothing. They borrow a survivor from a famous Greek shake tale, then keep him in Italy long enough to become family. This gives Rome an entry ticket to the Mediterranean conversation. In a Greek-speaking world, old cities like to have old stories. They like pedigrees, they like heroes with known addresses in myth, not just muddy huts on a hill. You know why Roman nobles enjoy this connection. If your city can speak to Greek learning in its own language, you look less like yesterday's upstart neighbor. You look like a partner in ancient matters, even if your accent remains gloriously Roman. You take a sip of Pascha and make a face that is only partly for the taste. It is cool now and faintly gritty. Someone has not strained it well. Scholarship often depends on such humble sorrows. By the 3rd century before your own day, this work of joining stories becomes almost eager. Romans start building a bridge from Troy to the Tiber with very confident carpentry. Each beam is a claim, each rope is a genealogy, every loose plank is painted over with patriotic varnish. The bridge serves several comforts at once. It makes Rome older than it looks. It makes Roman power feel less sudden. It suggests that destiny has been filling out forms for centuries and merely waited to file them. Gaius finds a Greek chronicle and clears his throat like a temple priest preparing a verdict. He points out that Greek writers mention Aeneas in various ways. He looks pleased, which on him resembles mild indigestion. For one moment, Troy is respectable enough for both of you. You smile and copy the reference before he changes his mind. This is how empires borrow dignity. They do not only conquer land, they also collect footnotes. Outside, a cart rattles faintly along the street below your window. Somewhere a dog shakes itself and settles again. The city at night sounds busy even when it rests, like a large household remembering one last chore. You think of what Roman elites want from this Trojan link. Prestige is one part. Intellectual legitimacy is another. If Greek teachers, readers, and diplomats hear familiar names in your origin story, they nod sooner and ask fewer sour questions. It also flatters Roman taste in a very comfortable way. You can admire Greek culture while declaring that your own roots stand beside it. This is the social art of taking a famous cousin to dinner and quietly paying the bill. Augustus understands that sort of thing better. He runs what feels like Rome's first full rebranding campaign. He has marble, poets, old rites, new images, and a personal interest in the city's founding CEO. It is all very tidy. Your commission sits inside that tidy plan. That would be vulgar. You are asked to arrange the truth, so it wears a clean white toga and remembers its best ancestors. Virgil has already done the grand version in rolling verse. He takes a refugee from a losing war and turns him into the root of Roman greatness. It is a remarkable commission. He is, in this matter, Rome's most gifted content creator. You work in smaller rooms than poets do. Poets can float over gaps with a cloud and a prophecy. Scholars must count years. Scholars must ask rude little questions about whether grandfathers can survive half a millennium by force of admiration alone. That is where your pleasant evening becomes arithmetic. You scratch dates onto wax, and stare at them until they look offended. Troy falls around 1200 years before the present count. Rome's foundation sits around 753. The gap yawns between them like an unfilled pantry shelf. 450 years is a long time to bridge with sentiment. It is long enough for villages to appear and vanish. It is long enough for roofs to rot several times over. It is long enough for family memory to become decorative rather than useful. You tap the stylus against your front teeth and immediately regret it. The wax tastes bitter. The stylus tastes of metal and old habit. The answer does not improve. If Aeneas arrives soon after Troy falls, Romulus cannot simply be his grandson. Even the most flattering family tree must respect the calendar sometimes. You need generations, you need names, you need enough rulers between the heroic founder and the twin babies to keep everyone from blushing. This is where the genealogy grows practical. A heroic migrant lands in Latium. His son founds Alba Longa. Then a line of kings stretches onward in a careful chain, each link polished just enough to look ancient. You reach for the Etruscan chronicle that might help with cross-reference. It is not in its case, it is not under the case, it has once again been definitively shelved in 4 places, and currently occupies none of them. Fulvia the archivist appears in the doorway at a half-jog. She has a smudge of dust on one cheek and 3 tied bundles under one arm. She sighs before you speak and says, "It was here this morning, I promise you." You believe her because this happens with a reliability almost sacred. The wandering scroll has a personality now. It likes suspense in the mildest possible form. It is the only object in the archive with a travel life more dramatic than Aeneas. While Fulvia hunts, you do the counting yourself. If the gap is roughly 450 years, then each reign must carry a share of the weight. Too many kings, and the line looks padded. Too few, and everyone starts aging like an olive tree. So the tradition settles on a manageable row of Alban kings. 14 names appear between Aeneas's line and the twins. They stand shoulder to shoulder on the page, like attendants at a ceremony, tidy and dutiful, with very little personality required. You know the list because you have copied it enough times to hear its rhythm. Silvius follows Silvius with almost comic devotion. Names repeat like family cookware handed down through generations. When a dynasty finds one useful label, it uses it with the enthusiasm of a household that owns only one good bowl. The kings are not famous because fame is not their job. Their job is duration. They hold the calendar in place. They occupy the years quietly, so Romulus can arrive at the right date, with proper ancestral furniture already arranged. You write each reign beside a small number on wax. The figures look neat at first. Then they begin to feel suspiciously neat, which is often a stronger warning. Real lives tend to spill at the edges. These men remain very good at staying within the lines. Gaius peers over your shoulder and asks whether any Greek has heard of half these kings. You tell him probably not. He makes the sound of a goat judging a lyre recital. Then he returns to his shelf, which counts as harmony in your study. Still, the Alban list solves a real problem with admirable calm. It turns a leap into a staircase. You can step from Troy to Latium, from Latium to Alba, from Alba to the twins, without tearing the sandals of chronology completely in half. The names also sound old enough to satisfy polite ears. They carry the dust of repetition. They suggest lineage, rather than invention. They are less like remembered men, and more like pegs hammered into the wall, so later coats have somewhere to hang. You brush eraser crumbs from the wax with the side of your hand. They gather in the crease of your palm like dark meal. The little acts of copying feel almost domestic. Great history often depends on the patient tidying of doubtful lists. The old pontiff once interrupted you during this very counting. He arrived uninvited as he prefers, and grew pink with alarm when you called the wolf story metaphorical. You did not mention post holes that day. You value peace and your furniture. Even he accepts the kings more easily than the wolf. A line of names feels respectable. Priests like continuity. It smells better than speculation, even when the names themselves are as thin as broth served at the end of market day. At last Fulvia returns with the missing chronicle and the expression of a woman betrayed by shelving. It was under agricultural leases from Campania. Nobody asks why. Some scrolls simply desire a second career. You untie the cord and compare another version of the line. Small changes appear. A reign length shifts. A name bends slightly. One king seems to have acquired years the way a merchant acquires extra figs, through optimistic handling. This does not ruin the structure. It only reminds you what sort of building this is. The bridge to Troy is sturdy enough for ceremony. It is less ideal for bouncing. Then your notes bring you to the woman who matters more than the kings admit. Rhea Silvia stands near the end of the chain with surprising quiet. She is the hinge of the whole device. Without her, the line does not fold neatly toward the twins. You write her name slowly, because everything gathers there. Aeneas leads to Ascanius, who is also called Iolus. Iolus leads to the Julian claim. Alba leads to Numitor. Numitor leads to Rhea Silvia. Rhea Silvia leads to Romulus and Remus. There it is on the tablet, a family path with excellent political manners. It joins Rome's founder to Troy. It joins the Julian house to the same sacred corridor. It lets bloodline and city line share a bench under the lamp and pretend they planned it together. You can see why this pleases Augustan ears. If the ruling family comes from Iolus, son of Aeneas, then the princeps stands inside the oldest story available. He is not merely governing Rome, he is inheriting a plot that began in smoke and prophecy. Rhea Silvia makes that elegant by being both distant and immediate. She stands close enough to the twins to feel real in the story. She stands far enough down the Alban line to keep the centuries from collapsing into a heap. She is genealogy doing fine needlework. The old tales dress her as a virgin of the hearth and mother of marvels. You do not need to raise your voice over that. Ancient stories often prefer their women symbolic and efficient. Still, in your notes, she carries the weight of centuries on very calm shoulders. You imagine her name spoken in a household long before dawn. Ash is stirred in the brazier. Bread dough waits under a cloth. Somewhere in all that ordinary life, dynastic necessity enters like a relative carrying too many expectations. That is the part you trust most in old stories, not the shining gods or the perfect omens. You trust the cups being rinsed. You trust the sandals by the doorway. You trust that every legendary bloodline still has to wake up and put on a tunic. Rhea Silvia also keeps the Julian claim from floating too high above the twins. Without her, the line to Augustus might seem to bypass Rome's own rough beginning. With her, the palace and the shepherd hut share distant kinship and can nod to one another across time. This is useful politics, wrapped as ancestry. A ruling house wants depth, not just power. It wants roots below the visible stone. It wants people to feel that history has been leaning this way all along. Virgil helps by singing the tune so beautifully that questions soften. You help by arranging the notes under it. Your work is plainer. It smells of wax and dust. Still, even plain work can steady a grand performance. You return to the first question and find it gentler now. Myth or history is not always a knife edge in Rome. Often it is a woven mat. One strand is memory, one strand is desire, one strand is politics wearing antique sandals. The Troy link belongs to that woven kind. It is not history in the way a tax record is history. It is not pure invention either. It grows from older stories, then bends toward Roman needs with impressive civic confidence. You look around your study and feel the city pressing softly through the walls. A servant passes below with a bucket. Someone laughs in the lane and then lowers the sound. The night air brings a trace of baked brick and river damp. On the desk, Aeneas and the twins now share one long road. The road is patched in places. Some stones are original, some stones are new. All of them are arranged so Rome can walk from heroic Greece to its own doorstep without getting mud on the hem. That, you think, may be the most Roman part of the whole affair. The city does not merely inherit stories, it renovates them. It adds an ancestor here, a king there, a useful daughter in the right place, and calls the result tradition. You finish a line and warm your stiff fingers around the clay cup. The pasca is nearly gone. The last sip tastes of vinegar and resignation. Scholarship has many noble aromas, and this is unfortunately one of them. Gaius has finally fallen silent among his piles of Greek authorities. Fulvia has ceased running for the night. Even the wandering scroll rests where you can see it, which feels less like order and more like a temporary truce. You read back what you have written in a low voice. Aeneas flees Troy. He comes to Latium. A long Alban line fills the years. Rhea Silvia joins the old blood to the twins. Rome gains age, prestige, and a family story fit for empire. It is almost too neat, which is why it lasts. People enjoy a past that arrives with labels attached. They enjoy a city that seems expected by the universe. They enjoy founding myths with respectable foreign credentials, especially if Greece might be listening. You set down the stylus and let the room grow still. The lamp hums softly. Cedar lingers in the cases. Outside, Rome sleeps on its 7 hills and dreams, as ever, of having always been inevitable. You sit very still in your study, while the lamp burns lower beside your elbow. The cedar oil from the scroll cases warms in the room. It mixes with papyrus dust and the sour tang of cooling pasca. Your stylus rests in the groove of a wax tablet. Its point leaves a faint silver line where you test a date. You are meant to answer Rome's oldest question with a straight face and neat handwriting. You are also meant to make the answer pleasing to an imperial patron. That is the real trick. You are not simply asking how Rome begins. You are asking how Rome wishes to remember its own beginning under Augustus. Outside, the night on the Palatine settles into a soft hush. Inside, the stacked rolls lean against one another like sleepy citizens, waiting for judgment. Gaius the Greek sits across from you with his arms folded into his shawl. He makes a small tutting sound whenever you reach for Livy too quickly. He says Homer already covers every useful truth about cities, founders, wanderers, and people who take omens very seriously. You suspect Homer never had to satisfy an Augustan clerk with a filing tablet. You smooth one papyrus edge with your thumb. The fibers catch slightly against your skin. Every line you copy carries 2 weights at once. One weight is old story, the other is present need. Augustus understands that balance better than anyone in Rome. He does not merely inherit the city. He presents himself as the man who steadies it and begins it again. You hear that claim in quiet ways before you ever see it carved in stone. You hear it in dinner talk and law court compliments and polite little phrases offered over figs. People call him the restorer of temples. They call him the bringer of peace. They call him careful things that lean very close to founder. You dip your pen and think about Romulus. You think about a man who marks out a city and says, "This line matters." Augustus likes that shape of story because it fits his own reflection. After years of Roman unrest, he can stand where Romulus stands and look usefully familiar. He does not say he is Romulus in a blunt way. That would do too much, like wearing a laurel wreath to breakfast. Still, he lets the likeness gather around him. He lets it settle like fine dust on every public word. You keep a note on a wax tablet near your knee. It lists small signs of this careful likeness. There's the talk of renewal. There's the talk of rebuilding. There's the claim that Rome rises cleaner and stronger under his hand. There's also the simple fact of stone. Old Rome has been brick and tufa and patched timber for a long time. Augustus keeps presenting marble, as if permanence itself now bears his seal. You have walked past fresh-facing slabs in the morning sun. They throw back a pale, clean light that makes older walls look tired. It is a clever kind of founding. You do not need to dig a first ditch if you can make the whole city feel newly made. Augustus once considers taking the name Romulus, or so the talk runs through your circles. Then the idea quietly cools, which is wise. Romulus as a current title is rather like placing a wolf on your dinner couch and pretending it is a lapdog. So Augustus becomes something smoother. He becomes princeps and restorer, and the man who mends the roof while also claiming the house. Your patron likes this language very much, who likes Rome old enough to be sacred and new enough to be his achievement. You scratch that thought into wax. The sound is soft and dry, like a mouse in grain. From the archive door comes the quick step of Fulvia. She arrives with 2 rolls, 1 broken tag, and the face of a woman who has already climbed too many stairs. She places the scrolls beside you and says, "It was here this morning, I promise you." This is her answer before you even ask for the wandering Etruscan chronicle. You thank her with great care. She sighs with greater care and turns at once toward another shelf. The missing chronicle has now been definitely shelved in 4 places and found in none of them. You begin to think it may have founded a city of its own. The room settles again. You return to Augustus and the way he wraps himself in beginnings. He needs that old glow because his own rise is still close enough to memory. Many Romans remember hard years and shifting loyalties, and men speaking of rescue while counting supporters. Augustus offers an end to all that noise. He offers order with polished edges. He offers calm streets, repaired shrines, and a family story for the whole city. In that family story, Romulus is no longer only a rough hilltop founder. He becomes the first shape of a pattern that Augustus finishes. You picture the Palatine in its earliest days. It is a tiny hill settlement with fences, smoke, goats, and opinions about the people next door. It is early Italy's most exclusive gated community. The gate is not impressive, but the suspicion is first-rate. Augustus loves that hill because it lets him stand on old ground while ruling a larger world. He can be modern power wrapped in antique dust. That is where Virgil enters your thoughts. If Augustus is building with stone, Virgil is building with lines. You have seen him on evenings when the light goes honey-colored and tired. He bends over a roll as if he is trying to smooth the whole Roman past flat. His room smells of ink, lamp smoke, and wool cloaks drying near the wall. A slave warms water nearby because even great poets prefer not to shiver. Virgil does not write like a man tossing off a clever dinner verse. He writes like a man hired to carry a city in measured lines. The Aeneid is not merely a poem for amusement. It is a commission with deep pockets, polite pressure, and the kind of deadline that never quite speaks its name. You sometimes imagine him rubbing his brow and staring at a phrase for an hour. Then you imagine Augustus asking very gently whether Book 8 might be moving along. State patronage makes fine art and also very nervous lunch. That truth seems pleasantly timeless. Virgil has to take an old Trojan refugee and turn him into Rome's clean origin point. He must make loss lead to greatness without sounding too eager. It is a hard task even before you add meter. It is harder still when the audience includes the most powerful man alive. You picture Virgil dictating a line and then stopping mid-step. He turns a word over in his mouth like an olive pit. Wax tablets lie open near his couch. A slave waits with stylus ready while Virgil changes one phrase, then another, then perhaps the first again. He is ancient Rome's original content creator, though the content is 12 books long and the client notes are imperial. That would sour anyone's Pascha. Yet, the poem is beautiful because it doesn't feel like a clerk's copy of an order. Virgil gives the myth warmth, weather, tears, roads, fields, and family weight. He fills it with ships, smoke, prayers, doorways, old fathers, young hopes, and the ache of long travel. He makes destiny feel oddly domestic. That is the genius of it. Rome does not receive a founding memo. Rome receives a grand household tale with enough sorrow to feel true and enough purpose to feel ordained. You know Virgil is shaping more than Aeneas. He is shaping how Romans imagine all founders after him, including Romulus. If Aeneas carries the gods and the household fire into Italy, then Romulus later lights the public hearth. Augustus can then polish the grate and call it restoration. The chain is tidy. Tidy chains are beloved by governments. You smile at that thought and take a sip of your Pascha. It has gone flat and warm, which is still better than listening to Gaius mention Thucydides after midnight. Gaius does mention a Greek comparison after midnight. He always does. He lifts one shoulder and says Roman stories improve greatly when a Greek witness appears somewhere nearby. He says this while borrowing your lamp. You remind him that Rome exists whether or not a Greek writes it down. He mutters that reality should still be properly footnoted. Virgil likely knows this tension well. He is writing myth under patronage, but he is also writing for educated readers with sharp ears. They know when a line rings hollow. They know when praise turns sticky. They know when a poet leans too hard on destiny and forgets dust. So Virgil gives them dust. He gives them roads under sandals and ash on altars, and the slow work of carrying old things forward. He lets greatness arrive through chores. That is one reason the poem settles so deeply. It flatters Rome while still smelling faintly of real travel and damp clothing. You think of the copies already moving through hands in tidy houses. Readers hear Augustus in the distance, but they also hear a human voice. That balance matters in your own work as well. You cannot simply write that Romulus was real because Rome needs him to be useful. You also cannot simply laugh and set the wolf aside like a child's toy. Romans do not love being told that their cradle song is just a joke. Livy understands this better than most. When you open one of his rolls, you feel at once how careful he is with uncertainty. He does not stomp on old tales, and he does not kneel too fast either. He handles them like old cups taken from a family shelf. One may be chipped, another may be polished by too many hands. Still, each one matters because people have long drunk from it. Livy often lets you hear the creak in the story. He admits that very early things are shadowed and mixed with marvels. Then he continues with grave respect, as if uncertainty itself deserves a formal seat at table. It is a deeply Roman sort of courtesy. You admire that tone because it matches what many educated Romans actually feel. They are not fools, and they are not scoffers. They can note the soft edges of a tale. They can also honor the shape it gives their city. You run your fingertip over a copied line and pause at a place name. The ink has pooled slightly in one letter. That small blot feels fitting. Early Rome comes to you just like that, with outline, meaning, and a little dark spread around the edges. Livy works from annals, family pride, temple records, old songs, and things that have plainly grown in the telling. He knows the mixture is messy. You know it too each time you compare one source with another. Dates shift like sandals in wet clay. The twins appear in one version with this sign, and in another with that omen. One account places a hut here, another moves it there. Then Gaius clears his throat and asks whether two Greek authors agree. You tell him two Greek authors rarely agree about breakfast. Livy's gift is not certainty. His gift is composure. He writes with enough doubt to satisfy the careful mind. He writes with enough reverence to satisfy the pious one. That makes him very useful in an Augustan age. Augustus wants old Rome honored, not picked apart like a fish on a lunch tray. Yet Livy is not a simple flatterer. You can feel him weighing his lines. He knows his patron lives in a city hungry for roots. He also knows roots become more tangled the deeper you dig. That may be why his words feel steady in the hand. He lets the myth stand without pretending it has no seams. The old pontiff arrives one afternoon, while you are thinking exactly this. He enters without warning, as if all thresholds are ceremonial suggestions. He smells faintly of wool, smoke, and old olive oil. His cheeks are already pink before anyone says anything difficult. You offer him a stool and a watered cup. He ignores the cup and peers at your notes. He grows visibly flushed when he sees a line where you wonder if the she-wolf might be metaphorical. He was once equally shocked by your use of the word post-holes. Some men cannot bear a wolf turned into a symbol. Some men cannot bear a fence reduced to soil marks. You reassure him that symbols can also be honorable. He looks at you as if you have proposed serving turnips at a triumph. Still, even he knows more than he admits. He has lived long enough to hear several forms of the story. He has seen priests wink softly while reciting things they also cherish. This is how Romans often manage their myths. They hold them in the front of the mind and the side of the mind at once. One hand lifts incense, the other adjusts the account books. When the old pontiff leaves, he does so in a rustle of offended dignity. He takes 2 figs from your tray on the way out. You mark another note for your chapter. Reverence and doubt are not enemies here. They are housemates sharing a narrow stair. That idea grows clearer when you leave your study and walk through the city's new stone settings. Augustus does not rely on books alone. He places myth where sandals strike it every day. He lets marble do what paper cannot. At the Arapaces, the air holds warm dust and the sweetness of nearby greenery. The carved stone feels cool if you press your fingers lightly near the edge. You move past curling leaves and solemn figures arranged in patient order. Children tug at drapery folds turned permanent by the chisel. The monument speaks of peace, family, right, and right order. It says these things without needing to raise its voice. That, too, is Augustan skill. If you tell Rome it is settled and blessed often enough, and in lovely enough surroundings, the claim begins to feel like weather. The old founding tale is part of that weather. It drifts through the carvings even when the twins are not before your eyes. You see it more plainly in the Forum of Augustus. There, the whole place arranges memory like a careful host, seating guests by importance. Marble colonnades catch the light along their edges. Sand crunches underfoot. The smell is sun on stone, with a little mortar and sweat. Statues stand in sequence, and make ancestry look wonderfully organized. Real family life never manages this, which is why public sculpture is such a comfort. Here are great Romans and Julian forebears, and legendary figures set into one calm visual argument. The city's past becomes a neat hallway leading toward Augustus. It is an elegant trick. They do not merely hear that Rome has ancient roots. They see those roots pruned, washed, labeled, and set upright in niches. The founder's story becomes part of the furniture of public life. Children ask questions there. Visitors stare upward. Sandals echo. Priests pass by. No one needs to announce a lesson. The lesson waits in stone until your eyes absorb it. You think of Romulus in that setting and almost laugh softly. A rough hill chief has become part of Rome's first grand rebranding campaign. There are marble monuments. There is state-supported poetry. There is a founder image polished like a household silver cup before guests arrive. Augustus understands that memory behaves better when given a handsome building. It is hard for a tale to feel flimsy beside a great wall. The Forum also lets him stand among the men who made Rome. He appears less like a sudden ruler and more like the latest needed link. That is how second founders are made. They do not erase the first founder. They stand beside him and borrow his profile. You return home with grit on your sandals and white dust on your hem. The lamp in your study looks small after so much stone. Yet the room feels dearer for that smallness. A city may display its myths in marble, but you still test them at a desk. You still compare lines, dates, and cheerful inventions. Fulvia appears again with a fresh bundle and a tired nod. She says the Wandering Chronicle is still not on the shelf where it has never been. You thank her and accept another substitute role. This is scholarship in Rome, which means patience, dust, and occasional surrender to chance. As night deepens, you think about the readers around you. Senators, poets, priests, tutors, merchants, and women with sharp minds all live among these stories. Most do not ask in a hard voice whether the twins are strictly historical. They ask softer questions. What kind of city are we if this is our beginning? What virtues do we claim if these are our founders? What shape does the story give our pride? That is why myth and history do not sit in separate baskets for them. They rest together like bread and olives on the same board. An educated Roman can admire a tale and also smile at its seams. He can recite an omen and later discuss topography over watered wine. He can visit a shrine with sincere feeling and still note that the dates never quite behave. This does not trouble him as much as you might expect. The old stories are not court witnesses forced to answer yes or no. They are more like family portraits painted from memory. The nose may be improved, the drapery may be fanciful, the affection is still real. You realize this is the true answer to your chapter's question. Romans under Augustus do not simply choose myth or history. They choose belonging, memory, and useful uncertainty all at once. They let the stories glow while knowing the lamp has been trimmed. Augustus encourages this state very gently and very thoroughly. He gives them poems to repeat, buildings to admire, rites to attend, and ancestors to claim. Virgil gives them feelings shaped into destiny. Livy gives them caution shaped into respect. The monuments give them stone shaped into certainty, or something close enough for public use. Together, these things make the founding legend feel older and firmer. You turn that thought over and hear Gaius snore once in his chair. Even skepticism has its bedtime. The lamp flame leans as if tired of empire. You shield it with your hand and look again at your notes. Romulus and Remus remain difficult in the way distant things always are. They flicker between hill smoke and literature, shrine and symbol, memory and design. Yet under Augustus, that flicker is not left alone. It is gathered, trained, polished, and set where all Rome can see. That shaping does not make the legend false in a simple way. It makes it purposeful. You know, many things in life work like that. A family story improves with retelling. A house altar gathers meaning from repetition. A city chooses the face it prefers in the mirror. Rome in this age prefers a founder tale that leads cleanly toward Augustus. That preference appears in poems, books, and marble all at once. You dip your stylus again and write with a slower hand now. The wax gives under the point like warm bread under a knife. You note that the legend survives because it can be believed at several depths. It can be sacred, useful, charming, and doubtful at once. Very few stories achieve that. Very few rulers understand how to help them do it. Outside, the night air cools the courtyard stones. Somewhere below, a servant stacks cups after the last meal. Inside, the cedar smell lingers in the scroll cases. The Pascha is nearly finished. The missing chronicle remains heroically absent. You sit with all of it in easy company. You sit with Virgil bent over his lines. You sit with Livy weighing his phrases. You sit with Augustus setting myth into stone until the city almost seems to found itself again. Then you add your own quiet page to their work. You do not settle the question forever, and that is almost a comfort. You simply show how Rome learns to cradle both doubt and devotion in the same steady hands. For this city, that may be the truest beginning of all. You still carry a few pictures from the night with you. You still see the Palatine in its plain early shape. You see not marble porches or triumphal steps. You see small Iron Age huts in a rough cluster. You see dark circles where posts once stand in the ground. You see clay, ash, and bits of broken pot. You see smoke that hangs low in the morning air. You see sleeping places close to the hearth. You see people who wake early because everyone wakes early. You see a little settlement that looks almost shy. It sits on the hill and minds its own business. It is early Italy's most exclusive gated community in the least oppressive possible way. The gate is mostly a ditch. The exclusivity is mostly suspicion. The neighbors on the next hill seem very near and very questionable. You smile at that picture because it feels so human. It feels small enough to touch. It feels more real than any shining child of a god. You also still hear the old pontiff making that offended little breath through his nose. He grows pink again in your memory when you suggest the wolf may be a story told in a richer way than truth first arrives. He never enjoys the word post holes. He treats it as if it has tracked mud onto a sacred floor. Yet the post holes stay politely in the earth anyway. They do not become less useful because a priest dislikes them. They tell you that Rome begins in timber, thatch, clay, smoke, and ordinary hands. That is one of the gentlest surprises of the whole question. When the gods step back a little, the people come into better view. Another picture stays with you just as clearly. You see the Tiber moving by with patient purpose. It is not grand in a theatrical way. It does not perform. It simply keeps being the river everyone needs. It carries traffic and news. It offers a crossing place. It ties the hills together whether the hills feel sociable or not. You can almost hear carts near the ford. You can almost smell wet reeds and mud. You can almost feel the damp breath of the river at dusk. Around it, little communities edge closer over time. They do not all merge in one proud afternoon. They do not hear a trumpet and become a city before supper. They drift together by use. They trade. They argue over boundaries. They share shrines. They marry. They copy habits. They watch one another's cooking smoke. They learn that the people on the next hill are irritating in very familiar ways. A path becomes a meeting place. A meeting place becomes a habit becomes a community. That slow joining is less neat than a founding date carved into stone. It is also more convincing. You can feel history doing its quiet work there. You can feel the river acting as the true organizer. It is Rome's first busy street. It is Rome's first practical advisor. It asks for no poem and receives one anyway. Even Gaius the Greek did not fully argue with the river. He still tries, of course. He still wants 2 Greek authors before breakfast. He still gives that soft tut when you cite Livy with a straight face. He mutters that Homer covered all of this already. Yet even he grows calmer when the evidence sits in front of him. Soil is hard to cross-examine. A river is harder still. And then there is the picture that fades and shines at the same time. You hold the famous story in one hand and the scraps of proof in the other. In one hand there is a she-wolf with famous instincts and very strong public relations. In one hand there is divine parentage that gives the family tree a dramatic upward branch. In one hand there is a furrow, a leap, and a brotherly disagreement handled with much more myth and patience. In one hand there is even a precise birthday for the city, neat as a label on a jar. In the other hand there is silence where certainty ought to be. There is no proof for the wolf. There is no proof for Mars visiting in fatherly fashion. There is no proof for the exact date. There is no proof for the story as the story tells itself. You do not say this with a harsh voice. You say it the way you would sort lentils from stones, gently, carefully, without insult. Myths are not useless because they are myths. They tell you what people want their city to be. They show you Rome imagining itself as chosen, hardy, bold, and touched by heaven. They show you Rome giving itself a noble baby picture. Augustus understands the value of that picture very well. He runs Rome's first truly dedicated rebranding campaign with the calm confidence of a man who knows marble lasts. He has poets, monuments, family claims, and a very clear sense that founders are excellent company to keep. Virgil does his part like the finest content creator in Italy. He takes a refugee from a losing war and turns him into the shining root of Roman greatness. It is very polished work. It is also not a field report. Still, beneath the polished tale, you can feel a harder little stone of truth. Perhaps there was once a real leader on the Palatine. Perhaps there is a chieftain, or organizer, or unusually convincing neighbor. Perhaps one person helps gather scattered households into something firmer. Perhaps one name grows large in memory because memory likes a face to pin a city on. That possibility does not feel silly at all. It feels likely in the modest human way that many great things begin. A real settlement grows, a real union forms, a real place becomes more than a few huts. Then the tale keeps being told. It's told again and again for 2,500 years. Each telling adds color, shape, certainty, and a little good posture. The wolf grows sleek, the father grows divine, the date grows exact, the city goes eternal. Yet when you strip away what cannot be proved, what remains is not disappointing. It is strangely moving. A city still rises from a cluster of hilltop lives. A river still pulls people together. Ordinary people still build something that lasts longer than their own names. That truth does not need fur or spears or a god in the family. Now the study feels warmer than before. And smaller, too. The lamp lowers into a softer gold, the cedar oil breathes from the scroll cases, and your clay cup of cooling Posca waits beside the wax tablet, while the last of Rome's oldest questions settles into the hush like dust returning to a shelf. And the wandering scroll, after being definitively shelved in 4 separate places all evening, finally rests where your hand leaves it, on the cedar shelf, as if it has behaved perfectly well all day. May your dreams be free of wolves with unusually generous maternal instincts. May your dreams contain no imperial patrons demanding you rewrite the ending to be more flattering. May your dreams be free of fratricidal arguments about which hill to build on. Thank you for listening. Keep your thoughts light, and good night.